An empire's court is never quiet, but this first meeting between these two is something else entirely. The silver-haired boy barely has time to register the girl in front of him before she is already passing judgment. Sienna, princess of the empire and someone who has clearly never been told no in a way that stuck, looks at him like his very existence is an offense to the throne, telling him that a lowly barbarian hostage has no business humiliating her and that he will regret it, and she means every word because before he can even open his mouth, her people are already on him. Hands pulling at his clothes and dragging him down while she stands over it all, with the cold satisfaction of someone who has never lost, and genuinely cannot imagine starting now. She wants him as her servant, and as far as she is concerned, that conversation is already over. But then something neither of them planned for begins to happen. In a quieter moment, she comes riding up on horseback and stops dead at the sight of him being targeted on the ground, and without a single second of hesitation, she dismounts and puts herself directly between him and whoever is responsible. Her reasoning is simple and entirely in character because he is her servant, which means he belongs to her, and nobody else gets the privilege of touching what is hers. It sounds cruel on the surface, and she would very much like it to stay that way. But underneath, something else is already moving, something she has not named yet and would absolutely deny if anyone dared point it out. Because Lazio is beginning to see through her, past the temper and the commands and the whole royal performance of it, all the way down to the cage underneath, and Sienna already knows it because she lies awake thinking about it herself. She is a princess, which sounds like power until you understand that the title is a gilded trap, a canary in a beautiful cage fated to be moved across a political board like a piece in someone else's game, with authority over everyone around her and none whatsoever over her own life. Then he reaches out his hand and says something that changes everything. He tells her she can. She can read and wield a sword and ride a horse and cross mountains and seas and reach the stars if she chooses. All the things they have spent her entire life telling her she cannot do because of what she is, and he tells her to go do every single one of them. And he promises that wherever she goes, he will always be right beside her. Nobody would have predicted this from these two, not from that first collision, but Sienna looks at him with something open and unguarded in her expression that she almost never lets anyone see, and she tells him it is a promise, that he has to stay by her side always, and they cross fingers on it like it is a thing that can actually be sealed and kept forever. But the castle is burning. Sienna stands in the wreckage with a sword between them, and her voice is steady in the way that voices only get when everything behind them is falling apart, and she asks him directly. Tells him that throughout everything they shared, he never lied to her, that he had no involvement in her father and brother's deaths, and she needs him to just say it. Lazio looks at her, says her name, and then says he is sorry. And just like that, the promise goes up in the same smoke as everything else, and Sienna screams no into the burning air, and that is where this story begins. But let us go back to where it all started. When dawn breaks over the rivers of the Theodore continent and the morning sun turns the earth red, there is an old ballad that people sing for the spirits of those who fought and died for love and for freedom, and this story lives inside that ballad because the once glorious Theodore Empire split into East and West. And after 3 years of border conflicts between the West Theodore Empire and the neighboring Saga Kingdom, a peace treaty was finally signed. And the price of that peace was an exchange of hostages between the three countries, which is what sets everything that follows into motion. In the capital of the West Theodore Empire, a city known as the Eternal City, a girl with golden curls is sprinting through the palace like she owns every corridor of it, which technically she does, and her name is Sienna, and she is the princess, and she is absolutely not supposed to be doing any of this, while her servant Neotis chases after her, begging her to stop, because if the emperor finds out she has escaped the palace grounds again, it will be a disaster. But Sienna is already climbing the fence and looking back at him with a brilliant smile and telling him it is their little secret before jumping to the other side, leaving Neotis standing there sighing because there is genuinely nothing he can do about her. She is on her way to find her swordmaster and prove herself, and when she spots Master Muller sitting alone, she decides the most logical approach is to hide in the bushes and launch a surprise attack. So she bursts out charging at him with her sword, and he flicks a bean at her forehead without even standing up, which sends her dropping the sword and hitting the ground while she holds her head in pain. And Master Muller looks down at her and says he would love to meet the assassin bold enough to attack him in broad daylight, while Sienna groans and tells him to stop teasing her. He helps her up and tells her there is someone he wants her to meet, and standing nearby is a boy with messy silver white hair, sun-kissed skin, and sharp golden eyes who carries himself with a quiet, guarded intensity. And Master Muller introduces him as Crown Prince Ladio of the Saga Kingdom, which prompts Sienna to look him up and down, and immediately declare that he is short, dark-skinned, and prematurely gray-haired. And when Master Muller corrects her that the hair is silver, she waves it off and says she does not want him, and asks for her brother Alas back instead. And the mention of Alas is where we understand the wound underneath all of this, because Alas is Sienna's twin brother who was sent to Saga as the hostage exchanged in return for Lazio, and his absence is the real reason behind everything she has been doing. Lazio listens to the explanation about Alas and Sienna's bond and says simply that he understands, which is the response of someone who knows exactly what it means to be moved across a political board without being asked. And then just as things seem to settle, Sienna notices the sword at his waist, and the red gem on it is so stunning that she reaches for it without thinking. And Master Muller tells her not to, but Lazio is faster and slaps her hand away. And when she tries again, he pushes her to the ground, and she sits there staring at him in genuine disbelief that this just happened to her in her own capital city in front of witnesses. Master Muller explains quickly that a Saga warrior's sword is sacred, and no one is permitted to touch it without permission under any circumstances. But Sienna has already noticed something more important, which is that Lazio held back, and if he had been serious, he could have put her down much harder than he did. And she files that away while standing up and announcing that regardless of customs, this is the Eternal City, and a hostage who openly offends the princess of the country holding him cannot go unpunished. And she is smiling the entire time she says it. And Lazio bows immediately and says the fault was his, and he will accept any punishment alone as long as his king is not blamed for it. I have to say, the fact that he took full responsibility without hesitation says everything about the kind of person he is. Sienna looks at him for a moment and then sits down and tells him with complete satisfaction that, since he said so, she wants him to become her servant. And what begins as a power move from a girl who just lost her twin brother and needs somewhere to put that pain, becomes the beginning of the most complicated relationship either of them will ever have. Neotis barely has time to process what he is seeing before Sienna makes her announcement, because the princess who left earlier has returned with a young foreigner at her side, and she turns to Neotis with that particular look of hers and tells him that Latio is his name and that starting today he is her new servant. And Neotis feels his entire career flash before his eyes in real time. Master Muller does not let it slide for even a second, knocking Sienna on the head before the words have fully settled and reminding her that the young man standing beside her is not some stray she picked up off the street, because Latio is a political hostage sent directly from the Saga Kingdom, and he is still royalty. And Master Muller had to go through considerable effort just to get the king's approval for him to serve as Sienna's study companion, so she is not to take advantage of his unfamiliarity with the language and culture, and there will be no bullying and no nonsense. Sienna's response is the most unbothered thing imaginable, as if she would ever do such a thing. The two of them walk side by side down the castle hallway, and Sienna is already replaying the whole incident in her head, and deciding that she does not bully people, she simply returns the favor when wronged, which is a completely different thing, and she glances over at Latio, who is already asking, calm as ever, whether she has any orders for him, and she does. She reminds him that he said he was willing to take responsibility for anything, and he confirms it without hesitation. When she pushes further and asks if he is truly fine doing anything at all, he says yes, and Sienna smiles and leads him straight to the study room, where the sight that greets him is a table completely buried under an avalanche of books. Latio stares at it, and Sienna informs him, completely reasonably, that since he is her study companion, it only makes sense that he helps with her homework, and Neotis walks in carrying even more books, takes one look at the situation, and quietly suggests this might not be a good idea, which earns him an immediate shush from Sienna. Latio looks at the pile and sweats a little because he was taught the language since he was young, but a mountain of essays is an entirely different matter. And yet, he closes the book in his hand and makes his decision, because this is exactly why he came here, to learn their political customs and diplomatic policies. So he gets to work. Days pass, and the two of them settle into a rhythm where Sienna keeps the pace relentless and Latio keeps up, moving through the material with his eye fixed on something further ahead. On the day he can stand beside his older brother and help the people of Saga live something closer to what he sees here, while Master Muller checks in periodically and tells Sienna not to run the boy into the ground before reviewing the work and moving on. Then comes the day Master Muller stands before them both and announces that Latio has managed to master politics, Latin, and Greek in an almost absurdly short amount of time, calling it genuinely incredible and giving him an approving pat on the shoulder before turning to Sienna and asking if she plans to fall behind. And Sienna is sweating while insisting she has been studying diligently the entire time. Outside the academy, the three of them stand in the open air, and Master Muller claps his hands, and a servant appears leading a horse, and Sienna's entire face transforms because she lights up immediately and starts moving toward it before anyone says a word. And Master Muller calls out for her to be careful, but she does not slow down at all. So the horse spooks at her approach, and the servant loses his grip and goes down, and Sienna stumbles and hits the ground. And before anyone else can react, Latio is already there, grabbing hold of the horse and getting onto its back in one motion and riding it through its panic until it settles into something calm and manageable. Sienna sits on the ground watching him, and her heart is going faster than the horse was. Master Muller rushes to check on her while Latio circles back unhurried and begins patting the animal down. And Master Muller asks what he said to it, because something that simple should not have worked that quickly. And Latio explains that in his language, he told the horse to race with the wind and follow its heart, because the animal was new here and had been pulled from everything familiar and constantly restrained, and its mind was in chaos. So all it needed was a moment to breathe and run freely. Master Muller nods slowly and explains that the horse was a gift from merchants that very morning, a breed native to Latio's homeland that he had specifically requested be brought over, and as it turns out, Latio is the only one who could have handled it, so the horse goes to him. Latio's expression shifts into something quiet and genuine that Sienna catches before she can stop herself, and she realizes she has never seen him look quite like that before. And Master Muller watches the whole thing unfold and thinks about Sienna, headstrong and physical and more free-spirited than any princess has a right to be. Difficult to contain, but perhaps exactly the kind of person who will know how to rule when the time comes. And he smiles and turns to announce that Prince Latio will be teaching Princess Sienna how to ride. The horse immediately spooks again, and both of them jump at the same time, and the lesson has not even started yet. Sienna has been at this for a while now, and the horse has completely stopped pretending to be cooperative about it, looking at her with what can only be described as open contempt while she stares back with a face that says she is one fall away from making a very different kind of decision today. And Latio watches from the side and makes the mistake of asking if it is really that difficult, which is absolutely the wrong thing to say, because Sienna whips around and tells him that if he is so talented, he can do it himself. And then she watches him do exactly that with effortless ease, which somehow makes everything worse. And he explains that in the Saga Kingdom, children learn to ride and shoot before they are 6, because it is simply basic, and Sienna reminds him through her teeth that this is her very first time. Something shifts in Latio's expression, and a memory surfaces of his older brother's voice telling him it is fine, and that he will definitely be able to do it. And without saying any of that out loud, he walks over and picks Sienna up without warning and sets her on the horse's back with himself seated behind her. And before she can get a single word of protest out, he is already talking, telling her to relax and stop pulling the reins so hard because horses are intelligent creatures with personalities just like people. And you cannot be afraid of them, but you cannot force them either because you have to offer them trust and respect and become one with them. And he taps the horse lightly with his heel and it moves forward. And Sienna feels the wind hit her face and something loosens in her chest. Because so, This is what it feels like? The speed and the air and the sense of going wherever you want to go, and she is smiling before she even realizes it. Laccio glances at her, and his heart does something inconvenient that he recovers from quickly, telling her she seems to have the hang of it now and that she can ride on her own for a while. And Sienna says, really? And then pushes him off the horse and takes off toward the horizon because she has been wanting to see what is over there, leaving Laccio standing in the dirt watching her go. While he waits, a small procession comes down the path led by a young boy named Dio, son of the king's second wife, who walks straight into Laccio and then looks at him like Laccio is the one who appeared out of nowhere. And after taking in the dark skin and unfamiliar clothes, he starts talking loudly, wondering aloud if Laccio is a prisoner of war from some small country, maybe Sagaris, judging by the clothing. And Laccio tells him plainly that yes, he is Sagaris. So Dio grins and says he has heard that Sagaris are good at singing and dancing, and asks why he does not perform something right now. And one of the servants adds helpfully that given how dark Laccio is, he is probably filthy, and that if lice were to jump off him, no one would be able to bear it. Laccio looks at all of them and introduces himself without raising his voice. Crown Prince of the Saga Kingdom and study companion to Princess Sienna by direct order, and Dio considers this for a moment and then pivots, pointing out that since Laccio is here to assimilate, he should not still be wearing Sagaris clothing, and he gestures to one of his servants and tells the man to remove his robe and put it on Laccio instead. And Laccio goes very still as the servant starts undressing, and Dio's other servants begin grabbing at him and pulling at his clothes, trying to force the change while the commentary flows freely around them. About how the Sagaris are built for slavery, and how foreigners are no better than dogs, and how it is only right that they lick the feet of their betters. Laccio's mind is moving fast because he cannot strike since he was sent here specifically to maintain the peace agreement, and one violent move means everything his kingdom negotiated falls apart. But they are taking this too far, and he says that last part out loud, calling them uncivilized swines before shoving them off and reaching for his sword. And Dio immediately starts shouting that the foreigner has a weapon and is dangerous, and the guards come running and servants crowd around and the commentary keeps coming. Someone saying it is their first time seeing a foreigner up close, and someone else saying not to get too close, and someone asking if he carries disease. And Laccio stands in the middle of all of it, thinking clearly that if he unleashes his actual strength, every single one of them ends up on the ground, and the only reason he is hesitating is because of what that would cost his kingdom. Then, hoofbeats cut through everything, and Sienna comes in hard on the horse, and her voice silences the crowd immediately as she tells all of them to stand down. And she dismounts and walks straight to Laccio and positions herself in front of him, facing Dio before saying with complete calm that he is her servant and she is the only one allowed to bully him. I mean, she has a point. Meanwhile, far away in the eastern capital of Theodore, a servant enters the palace and delivers a letter to King Nia from a secret emissary of the Western Empire. And the king reads it and says he will never allow anyone to be naive enough to think an alliance can be built on a hostage escape scheme before walking out of the room without another word, which tells us that whatever is being planned in the West, the East already knows about it and is watching very closely. The throne room is tense before anyone even opens their mouth, and Dio stands before the king with the most wounded expression he can manage and delivers his version of events, explaining that he and his servants were simply trying to help a foreigner assimilate out of pure goodwill when Princess Sienna came charging at them on horseback in what he calls unbridled unruliness. And he says it twice just to make sure it lands, and the king turns to Sienna and asks if it is true, and she says yes, because they were bullying Laccio and she was simply enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens. And the king looks at his daughter and tells her that a princess must uphold a princess's virtues, and that he cannot understand how she and Alas are twins when they share the same face but completely different everything else. And Sienna looks at her father and tells him she also wishes she were more like her older brother, but she is who she is. The king shifts his attention to Laccio and acknowledges that his uncle, the king of Saga, is a man of genuine bravery, and that some of that must have carried over. And he says he agreed to the study companion arrangement because they are the same age and could grow together, but he does not want that influence shaping Sienna away from what she is meant to be, because she is a princess first and one day she will marry a king or a prince and become the mother of a nation. And as for Laccio, he is in their country now and should dress accordingly, and Dio and his servants are smiling the entire time. Laccio opens his mouth to respond, and Master Muller's hand lands on his shoulder before a single word gets out, and Master Muller turns to the king and speaks carefully, pointing out that Laccio traveled thousands of miles for the sake of peace between their nations, and that his clothing is a mark of respect for where he comes from. And since he is young and misses his homeland, he asks whether His Majesty might consider allowing him to keep some portion of his traditional dress as a show of benevolence. And the king asks how that would even work, so Master Muller gets to work and puts together something in between, a blend of both worlds that actually holds together surprisingly well. And Dio comments that it has an interesting flavor, which in his mouth sounds exactly like an insult trying to pass as a compliment. Sienna tells Laccio not to listen to any of them because he genuinely looks good, and a mirror is brought over so he can see for himself, and the king approves it, and Laccio bows and thanks both the king and Master Muller. But then the king turns back to Sienna because he is not finished, and tells her he cannot overlook the fact that she struck people and charged at them on a horse. And whatever her reasons were, she does not get to talk her way out of it. And she starts to explain, and he cuts her off and sentences her to 1 week in the tower to reflect. And he walks out while she calls after him, and he does not stop. Dio watches her and smiles wide, telling her that if he finds the time, he will drop by the tower to check on her miserable plight since it is so high up that even birds do not bother flying there. And one of his servants steps toward her, and she slaps the hand away before it can touch her, and says she will go herself, because no one needs to escort her anywhere. And Laccio says her name quietly, and she looks at him and tells him not to worry because the moment she is out, anyone who dares touch him again is going to regret it. While Master Muller tells Laccio under his breath that she is the princess and she will be fine. That night, the tower room is quiet and the dinner tray sits untouched on the table while Sienna lies on her bed staring at the ceiling with her father's words circling back over and over. A princess must uphold a princess's virtues. He cannot understand how she and Alas are twins. One day she will be married off to a king or a prince, and she sits up and thinks about how she can wield a sword and ride a horse and do what the boys do and more, and still the only thing that seems to matter is who she ends up married to. Like she is nothing more than a trophy waiting to be handed over, and her eyes fill and she does not bother fighting it because she just wants to know if anyone sees her. Not the title, not the future bride, not the embarrassing twin, just her. Then, a voice cuts through the dark from somewhere below the balcony, and it is Lachio calling her name. And Sienna's head snaps up and she crosses to the balcony and looks down. And there he is, standing in the night looking up at her, and she says his name back. And for a moment, neither of them says anything else. And they just look at each other across the dark. Sienna is still wiping her face when she asks how he even got up here, because the tower is surrounded by guards and it is not exactly a casual climb. And Latio explains that he slipped past the sentries, found the right angles, and used a triple jump to clear the balcony ledge. And Sienna stares at him for a moment before deciding that the moment she is out of this tower, he is teaching her everything because she wants to learn how to do it herself. Latio had come up half expecting to find her completely fallen apart, but clearly that was not necessary. And then a servant's voice comes from inside the room asking if everything is all right because someone heard her voice. And Sienna pulls the curtain around Lazio in one smooth motion and calls back that her throat was bothering her and she needed to yell a little, and that she is fine now and no doctor is needed. And the servant accepts this without question and leaves, and Sienna exhales and then realizes how close she is standing to Latio and steps back immediately. Lachio looks past her at the untouched dinner tray and does not say anything about it at first, asking instead if she is all right. And Sienna says, what difference does it make? Because she is stuck up here, whether she is angry or sad or both, and she cannot break free from what she is, a princess. And that is her fate with no escaping it. And Latio tells her she can, and then he takes her to the highest point of the tower where they walk along a narrow ledge in the dark, and Sienna thinks she severely underestimated how nerve-wracking this would be. And by the time they reach the top, she is cowering close to the floor because the drop below is genuinely terrifying. Lachio reaches his hand down to her and tells her to look at him, just at him, and to believe in herself because she can do this. And Sienna takes his hand and feels something settle in her chest that she cannot quite explain because just holding it is enough to pull the courage back up. And they reach the end and she looks up and the sky from up here is something else entirely. So she says it out loud because there is no other response, telling him it is beautiful and asking how he even found this place, when she grew up in this palace and never knew it existed. Lachio sits down and tells her that every night from the time the stars appear until the sun comes back up, he comes here and looks toward home. And Sienna looks out in the direction he points, and he tells her that past the Milky Way near the Meteor Sea, that is where the Saga Kingdom is, and Sienna frowns and says she has only ever heard it called the Latte Sea. And Latio explains simply that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, disappearing into that sea, so his people named it after, where the light goes. And Sienna laughs a little at the idea of the same water having two completely different names, depending on where you are standing. And she thinks about her brother Alas somewhere on the other side of it, and wonders if he has found his footing yet, because going that far from everything familiar cannot be easy for him either. Latio tells her that while his capital may not match the Eternal City in scale, it has its own kind of beauty, with mountains that go up forever and waterfalls that make you stop moving just to look at them. And Sienna says she wants to see it and she means it. And Latio tells her she will get the chance someday, so she tells him that when that day comes, he has to take her everywhere and make sure she eats all the best food. And he says he will, and she holds out her pinky finger and makes him promise, and he wraps his around hers and the deal is done. Something about that pinky promise hits differently when you know how this story ends. They make their way back to the balcony and walk straight into a problem because 4 guards and Dio are standing inside her room waiting. And Dio announces that he heard the princess had gone missing and rushed over personally out of deep concern, and had even considered the possibility of an assassin. And then he looks at both of them and asks with a smile what exactly the meaning of this is. And Sienna and Lazio look at him and neither of them bothers hiding how they feel about his face right now. Sienna can see what this room used to be underneath all the new decorations layered over it like someone was trying to bury the original, and she says it out loud because she cannot help herself, that this was her mother's palace. And now that woman has made it entirely her own, and Dio finds this absolutely hilarious. Then the king walks in and the room snaps to attention with every maid and servant dropping into a bow, and the king's second wife Antonia enters behind him, takes one look at Sienna, and sits down beside the king like she belongs there, which technically now she does. And Dio wastes no time telling his mother and the king that he had only gone to pay his respects to the princess, when he discovered the tower empty, and that fearing for her safety, he searched everywhere and never imagined he would find her, climbing down the balcony with Prince Latio. The king looks at Sienna and asks what she has to say for herself, pointing out that he told her to reflect on her actions and she used the time to escape, and Sienna tells him the tower was boring and she simply asked Latio to take her out for a short while and did not think the tower walls had eyes. And Antonia turns to the king with the expression of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment, telling him, this is what happens when you pamper a child without limit, and that one moment she is fighting and riding horses, and the next she is sneaking out with a boy. And she says they are lucky nothing worse happened, and that if this continues, the entire empire will one day be humiliated by it. Sienna's jaw tightens and Lachio's hand finds hers before she can say a word, and then he steps forward and speaks directly to the king, telling him that Sienna only said what she said to protect him and that he was the one who climbed up to the tower and brought her out, and since she was imprisoned and had no way to contact him, she did nothing wrong this time. And he adds that she has always shown the king the respect and love he deserves, and that she was afraid of disappointing him. While he himself acted out of his own desire to earn her favor as someone new and unfamiliar with the customs here, So the fault is entirely his, and he asks the king to please punish him instead? And Lazio bows and Sienna stands there staring at him, unable to speak. The king is quiet for a moment and Antonia says his name softly, and he looks at Lazio and says, "Very well." The punishment falls on him alone. And one of the attendants reminds the king what the law prescribes for this offense. And the word caning drops into the room like a stone, and Sienna's face drains completely as she says the word back like she misheard it. And the king confirms it, and then he and Antonia and Dio walk out together with Antonia and Dio, smiling as they go. Later, Neotis leads Sienna through a quiet corridor and tells her not to worry because Lazio is a foreigner and the punishment is done, and the doctor came at noon and the courtyard is empty now with no one watching. And Sienna steps into the room and sees him lying face down on the bed with the marks on his back visible even from the doorway, and her eyes fill before she can stop them. And Lazio stirs and reaches for his sword in one motion before she tells him it is her and he settles. And she looks at him and asks who told him to do that, because she is a princess. And even if she had been punished, it would not have come to this since it is different for him. And she would not be surprised if those bullies used every stroke as an opportunity to settle their own scores. Then she pushes him back down gently and tells him to stay still, because they have had their turn and now it is hers. And she climbs onto his back and delivers 3 very deliberate light slaps right where it hurts. The first for letting her fall to the ground, the second for being so impressive that Master Muller made her feel like she was falling behind, and the third for knowing about that beautiful place at the top of the tower and not bringing her there sooner. And then she sits back and announces that her revenge is complete before telling him he is her friend now, and Lazio turns his head and looks at her like she is something he has never encountered before in his entire life. Outside the door, Neotis stands in the hallway thinking about what she brought with her tonight, the medicinal powder from the late queen that was meant to be saved for life and death situations only, and he hopes Prince Lazio understands what that means. The next morning, at the ports of the Western Theodore Empire, a ship comes in from the water and a man sneezes loudly the moment he steps off and asks irritably why no one told him it would be this cold, and his servant informs him carefully that it is actually not cold here at all, and that this region runs hot. And the man sneezes again just as the trumpets sound and the guards line up, and a general steps forward to formally announce the arrival of the Honorable King of the Eastern Theodore Empire, Nia Drusus, to the Eternal City, and King Naya looks out at the capital and smiles. Antonia arrives in the clothes room with the energy of someone doing a favor while collecting a debt, telling the servants to take everything out before turning to Sienna with a perfectly measured smile, and explaining that the king wants her to attend the banquet dressed like the monarch she is, and that these gowns were selected personally, so she should take her time and choose one she likes. And Sienna looks at her and tells her she knows exactly what this is. But Antonia does not flinch, and says she is simply following the king's orders, and that King Naya is young and full of promise, and that if Sienna catches his eye and a marriage unites their countries, it would be a tremendous contribution to the Western Empire. And the servants scatter immediately to carry out their instructions until one of them approaches Sienna carefully and asks which dress she would like to try. And Sienna tells all of them to leave her alone, and they scatter even faster. Lazio walks in to find the room in complete disarray and asks what is happening, and Sienna tells him exactly what is happening. That Antonia already manipulated her father into sending a lass away as a political hostage, and is now running the same play with a political marriage, and she is not putting on a single thing that woman's hands touched. And Lazio picks up one of the fabrics and turns it over and tells her the clothes actually look good, and that the material is fine and she would look splendid in them. And Sienna tells him he should wear them then. And Lazio stares at her while her expression does not change, because that is exactly what she means. And she tells him to try one on, and that if it looks good on him, she will decide later whether she wants it or not. And Neotis stands in the corner, holding his head. Lazio changes, and Sienna looks at him, and her eyes go wide, and she tells him he cannot take it off, and is not to go anywhere or move at all, because she needs to show Master Muller immediately. And she is already walking out the door before anyone can stop her, while Neotis calls after her and then has no choice but to follow. And the room goes quiet with Lazio standing there alone, thinking that he must look absolutely terrible if she felt the need to present him as evidence to their teacher. Meanwhile, in the inner palace, a very different kind of suffering is taking place, because King Naya wanders the corridors yawning deeply, and asking his snake how much longer until this banquet begins, explaining that the Eastern Empire has its protocols, but he never imagined the Western Empire would be just as exhausting, and he is bone-tired from traveling and still has to stand in front of an everlasting holy fire and make offerings. And he tells his snake sympathetically that he knows it is dying to swim somewhere, and that there is not a single pond in this miserable place. Then he hears it, the sound of moving water somewhere nearby, and he follows it through the corridors into a courtyard and stops completely because there is a pond, and standing in it is Lazio, still wearing the dress. King Naya stares at the figure in the pond and thinks one thing clearly, which is beautiful, and he walks closer while Lazio backs away fast, and Naya tells her not to be afraid because he is not dangerous. And then his snake slides out from his sleeve and Lazio falls backward into the water, and Naya crouches down and explains calmly that he only followed the sound of water because he wanted to let his pet swim, and he helps Lazio up and pulls him close and studies his face while Lazio is already running the calculation in his head, taking in the flamboyant dress and the serpentine jewelry that signals serious status and the rare snake for a pet and the fact that he is roughly the same age, and there is no question that this is King Naya of the Eastern Empire. So the problem now is getting out of here without being recognized. Nia tilts his chin up and asks if she is a maid at the palace, and Lazio shakes his head slowly because he cannot say he is a maid here, since this is Sienna's palace, and that answer leads nowhere good. And Naya smiles and lets his eyes drop and comments on how slim and toned her legs are before guessing that she must be a dancer. And Lazio shakes his head more vigorously while thinking that this king needs to be stopped immediately. And then Naya's face lights up with sudden understanding as he pulls Lazio in close and murmurs in his ear that he has figured it out and that she was sent to seduce him. And Latio shoves him directly into the pond and runs, while Naya sits in the water completely soaked and genuinely confused about what just happened. That night, the throne room is bright and loud, and every surface is covered in food, and King Naya sits among the guests, turning the earlier encounter over in his head, and genuinely cannot decide whether that was a girl or a boy. And a servant nudges him back to attention just in time for the king to rise with his cup and welcome Naya formally, speaking of a long journey and a gracious guest before raising a toast to his arrival. And the room stands and drinks, and Naya rises in return and corrects him warmly by saying, "This is not an arrival because the Eastern and Western empires are family, and a nephew does not arrive at home but returns to it." And he raises his cup to generations of unity between their kingdoms, and the king drinks with a satisfied look before clapping his hands and sending Persian dancers pouring into the room to fill it with music, telling Nia he selected them personally, and Nia watches and says they are wonderful, and that Persian women are beautiful and the music is divine. Sienna sits among the guests watching the dancers and genuinely thinking they are something to see, and then she glances to her side and finds Latio eating with his head completely down and entirely unbothered by any of it, and she tells him to look up because he is at a banquet and not a dining table. And then King Naya's eyes move across the room and land on them, and he comes down from his seat and stops in front of Sienna and asks if the princess would grant him the honor of a dance, and Sienna's face goes completely still. Latio is already writing Sienna's response in his head because she spent the entire day refusing to wear anything Antonia picked, and there is no possible world where she says yes to this dance. And then Sienna says, "Sure," and Latio's face does not move a single muscle. Sienna takes King Nia's hand and walks to the floor thinking one thing, which is that he is so handsome, while the king and Antonia watch from their seats with matching smiles, and Dio leans toward Latio and helpfully points out that Princess Sienna seems quite taken with King Naya, given his high standing and natural charm and exceptional looks, which are completely different from a certain dark-skinned someone sitting right here. And Latio watches Sienna laugh and spin across the floor and says absolutely nothing. Then her dress catches on her shoe and she misses a step and cries out, and Latio is already on his feet moving toward her when Naya pulls her into his arms first and holds her steady and asks if she is all right. And Sienna looks up at his face and finds herself thinking about his eyelashes specifically, and how unfairly long they are before concluding that he must be some kind of legendary eyelash demon. And Latio stands beside them and watches all of this. Later, the two of them are outside looking up at the moon, and Sienna thanks Nia for catching her, telling him she nearly humiliated herself in front of everyone, and that her father is going to hear about it regardless because she has 2 left feet and cannot even get a dance right. And Naya tells her that is not entirely accurate because her posture and movement are actually not bad, and the real problem is the dress restraining her and making her look uncomfortable. And he thinks she can dance far better than what he saw tonight. And Sienna admits the dress is not even hers and that they put her in it in order to, and Naya finishes the sentence for her by saying to win his favor. And Sienna confirms it, and Naya laughs openly and asks her directly if she would be willing to become his wife, and Sienna opens her mouth and nothing comes out. Behind a column, Latio stands very still, thinking that this man is moving dangerously fast and someone needs to intervene immediately. And then Naya leans toward Sienna, and Latio steps out and shoves him back and puts himself between them and says, "Stop." And servants rush in and pull Naya upright, asking if he is all right, while Naya looks past them at Latio and asks where this young foreigner came from. And Sienna turns on Latio immediately and asks how he could shove a king. And Latio starts to explain what Naya was about to do, and Sienna puts her hand over his mouth before he can finish the sentence, and she turns back to Naya and apologizes smoothly, explaining that her friend Latio is new here and unfamiliar with court customs and was most likely just trying to protect her. And she says it smoothly and she says it well. Nia looks at her for a moment and then looks at Latio and says the name out loud like he is turning it over, and then he looks closer at Latio's face and asks if they have met before, and Latio thinks no. And then Nia's eyes drop to the sword at his waist and land on the golden scimitar with a star ruby set into it, and he goes completely still before looking back up at Latio and asking if he is the saga prince who once felled a lion, with his bare hands. Sienna's jaw nearly drops when King Naya tells the story, because apparently Egnor, king of Saga, was ambushed by a pride of lions on the barred prairies where swords shattered and guards froze at the worst possible moment, and then a young prince tore through the crowd, grabbed a broken blade off the ground, and drove it into a beast's chest just as it lunged for the king's back. And when the sword was pulled free, a single star ruby tumbled out from the lion's heart. So King Egnor had a new scimitar forged around that broken blade with the ruby set inside and presented it to the boy who saved his life. And King Naya finishes the legend and turns his gaze straight at Latio and says it is him, and Sienna spins toward Latio like she is seeing him for the very first time. Latio does not take the bait and tells King Nia the compliment is misplaced because he is just Princess Sienna's study companion, and the sword is not some miraculous treasured blade from legend, but just something King Egnor carried on his person and gave to a boy he pitied for traveling so far, so young. And King Naya is unmoved, and points out that a king of an empire does not hand a child a personal weapon out of pity. But Latio does not argue back and instead steps away and tells King Naya the balcony is cold and that Sienna has a weak constitution before announcing he is taking her inside. And Sienna barely gets a word out before his hand covers her mouth and he steers her away while King Naya watches them go and tells his appalled servant he finds the whole thing more interesting this way. Back inside the palace halls, Sienna rounds on Latio immediately about being disrespectful and shoving a king, and now slandering him too. And Latio tells her it is not slander if it is the truth, and then he looks at her differently and asks if she actually likes King Nia, and she says yes, just like that. And the air shifts completely as Latio steps forward and pushes her against the wall with his face close, and demands to know what she could possibly like about a man she only just met today. And she says she likes his temperament and his manners, and Latio says it was all an act, and she says so what? Because at least King Naya did not shove her into the ground upon their first meeting, and at least he invited her to dance. And Latio goes quiet before saying it plainly that he is rough and barbaric, so she should go and let King Nia dance with her. And he walks off while Sienna calls after him that she absolutely will. And then Latio finds the nearest wall and drives his fist straight through it, and bricks crumble and his hand splits open and bleeds. That is what jealousy looks like when someone cannot even say it out loud. In her room, Sienna falls back onto her bed and tells Neotis that Latio was completely unreasonable. And Neotis suggests gently that Latio only acted that way because he could not bear to watch King Nia take her away. And Sienna shakes it off and says that if he cared, he would not have raised his voice at her and told her to leave. And she says it like she is still trying to convince herself it does not sting. And then Neotis adds quietly that maybe Latio does not see her as just a friend, clarifying he means that in the romantic sense. And something crosses her face as she grabs a pillow and buries herself in it, repeating no way over and over like she can think it out of existence. While across the palace, Latio stands alone by his window, wrapping the wounds on his hand with the silence doing all the talking, his words could not. In Sienna's dream, Latio stands before her and tells her he likes her. And when she says she likes him too, he shakes his head and says not like that because his like for her is something closer to love. And he reaches for her hand and leans in, and just as his face draws near enough to kiss her, she wakes up in a panic. And the first face she sees is King Nia, leaning over her, gently calling her name. And she sits up fast and their faces end up inches apart, and he asks with quiet amusement why she is sleeping in a place like this. And she scrambles to her feet, still half dazed, managing only a shaky good afternoon. And King Nia steps closer anyway and tells her that her defenselessness right now is genuinely concerning. And when she explains she accidentally dozed off in her late mother's garden, he simply tucks a flower into her hair and leans in and tells her softly that it is in the nature of the butterfly to pursue the flowers. That is exactly when Latio walks past with Master Muller, and Sienna spots him and her mind immediately drags her back to the dream and her face flushes without permission. And Latio clocks King Nia standing that close to her, and his expression hardens and he keeps walking like he did not see her at all. And Sienna is so caught off guard by the deliberate snub that she walks straight into a table and yelps loud enough for the whole garden to hear. And King Nia turns immediately to check on her, while Latio, despite everything, turns around too without thinking, and in doing so, steps clean onto Master Muller's garment, and Master Muller goes down. The infirmary ends up hosting both of them, with Sienna nursing her foot and Master Muller nursing his dignity, while King Nia watches with barely concealed amusement, and Latio stands to the side looking like he wants to be anywhere else. And Master Muller turns to Sienna and asks what exactly happened. And Sienna, without missing a beat, tells them she saw a white-headed wasp near King Nia, and explains with complete seriousness that the species appears docile right up until it loses its temper, at which point it stings anything within. Reached to near death, and she panicked, trying to chase it away before it could get to His Majesty, and ended up hurting herself in the process, and Latio is visibly sweating while King Nia bursts out laughing. She looked him dead in the eye and invented an entire wasp species, and honestly, the respect is deserved. King Nia collects himself and tells her the Western Empire is truly something else, and that its princess is lovely, and apparently even its wasps are extraordinary. And then his expression shifts into something more deliberate as he tells her it is a shame his visit ends in 2 days, and asks if she would be willing to return to the Eastern Empire with him, and the room goes silent as Sienna and Latio turn to him at exactly the same moment and say what. Sienna stares at King Nia and asks what he means, and he does not answer immediately, but instead steps closer and places one hand on the arm of her chair and looks directly at her face, and tells her he wants to hear her voice by his ear at every moment of the day, and to see her smile, and that the loneliness of being separated from her is something he simply cannot bear. And Sienna short-circuits completely while pointing at herself and mouthing back fragments of everything he just said. And that is when Latio steps forward, and King Nia glances at him with irritation while Latio looks back with a calm smile that says everything without saying anything. And then King Nia pulls back and tells Sienna with a laugh that he was only teasing and that her expression when she is deep in thought is even cuter than he imagined. But he adds quietly before leaving that while the invitation was a jest, the loneliness he will feel once she is gone is entirely real. And then he walks out while Sienna watches him go, and Latio watches him go with a completely different expression. That night, King Nia meets Antonia in an abandoned courtyard under cover of darkness, and Antonia does not bother softening her words, asking plainly what business he has that could not be handled during daylight. And King Nia responds with something about how the moon does not despair for residing in darkness, but instead shines all the brighter for it. And then a servant steps forward with a small box, and Antonia's composure cracks just slightly when she sees what is inside before she tucks it away and slips off into the dark with her servant. Passing close enough to where Latio is standing in the hallway above that he can see she is smiling, and his mind starts moving fast because a gift from a foreign king to the king's mistress in secret in the middle of the night is not a courtesy visit. And then it hits him that Antonia once charmed the king into sending Prince Alas away as a political hostage, and nearly locked Latio himself into a forced political marriage. And if she is playing the same game now with King Nia as her piece on the board, then his real reason for coming to the Western Empire may have nothing to do with diplomacy at all. And just like that, the whole visit starts looking a lot less like a courtesy call and a lot more like an opening move. And then Latio goes completely still because King Nia is looking directly at him from across the courtyard, and he has been seen. King Nia crosses the courtyard and walks straight toward where Latio is standing without a single moment of hesitation, and Latio holds his ground while King Nia greets him pleasantly, and then asks with a calm smile what exactly he saw, and Latio says he does not know what he is talking about. And they look at each other for a long moment with neither one blinking, and then King Nia tilts his head up at the sky and remarks that the moon is beautiful tonight, before adding that Latio seems to carry a certain prejudice against him, and Latio tells him he is overthinking it. King Nia begins walking away but keeps talking, his voice light and almost conversational, saying that in matters of war and relationships alike, people have always operated on preconceived notions. And then he stops and asks directly whether Latio sees him as an enemy, because the way Latio looks at him is exactly how one hunter looks at another, aiming for the same prey. And Latio's answer is measured and final, telling him he has no intention of pitting himself against anyone, and that whatever King Naya may be plotting, he will not interfere. But he will never allow anyone to harm Princess Sienna. And King Naya turns around and laughs genuinely, before leaning close and telling Latio something that stops him cold. That the one who has piqued his interest is not Sienna. And then he walks off still smiling, leaving that sentence hanging in the night air like smoke. Whatever that man is actually planning, it is not what anyone in this story thinks it is. The next morning, Sienna is already sneezing before she is even dressed, and Neotis pushes a warm outfit toward her and tells her the port will be cold and her health comes first. But Sienna is not listening because she is staring at her wardrobe, telling Neotis to hurry up and help her pick something, since King Naya is leaving today and she needs to leave a lasting impression. And Neotis looks at her with quiet alarm, thinking to himself that she cannot actually have fallen for King Naya, and then he asks her carefully, almost gently, whether she truly has no feelings left for Prince Latio. And that lands differently than anything else he has said. So Sienna stands up and grabs the nearest garment and flings it across the room while announcing that she would never like that wasp of a person. And the clothing sails through the air and lands directly on Lazio, who has been standing in the doorway the entire time, and Neotis says his name, and Sienna turns around and goes completely still. Neotis breathes the name like a warning, and Sienna lunges for the nearest curtain and wraps it around herself, while Latio stands in the doorway pulling the thrown garment off his body with the energy of someone who has decided to feel absolutely nothing about what he just heard. And he tells them to hurry up because it is time to go before walking out, and Sienna stares after him and asks what his problem is, but nobody answers because nobody has a good answer. Outside the inner palace, Latio is already moving, turning those 4 words over in his head, as if I would like that wasp, and he cannot let it go. And at the port, the crowd has gathered while King Naya works the farewell with effortless precision, embracing Antonia warmly and passing her a gift and exchanging smiles with the king. And then his eyes find Latio and Sienna, and something shifts in his expression, sharp and amused, while Latio stares back with the kind of intensity that is one step below a declaration of war, and King Naya thinks to himself, oh ho, an assertion of dominance. Sienna steps forward and apologizes for coming empty-handed, saying she had no idea gifts were expected, and King Naya reaches out and lifts the ribbon from her hair and tells her she did bring a gift, that the sight of this ribbon on her head is the finest thing he has received today. And then he kisses it and tells her their paths will cross again soon, before glancing once more at Latio with a satisfied smile and boarding the ship. And the moment he is on deck, he exhales and mutters that he is absolutely exhausted, and one of the ladies near him notices the ribbon and asks if it carries the same perfume as the gift he gave Lady Antonia. And King Naya goes still and then corrects her quietly, not perfume, calling it the final piece needed to bring an ancient empire to its knees, and then he drops it into the water and watches it sink. Whatever game King Naya is actually playing, it has nothing to do with ribbons and farewell smiles. Back in the Western Empire, the king is sprawled in his chambers, entertaining himself while Master Muller and the other masters arrive at his door, only to be told by a servant that His Majesty will not be attending today's Senate meeting either, and Master Muller nods without surprise and turns away. And in the courtyard, a servant tells Dio brightly that his mother is about to be made queen, and Dio confirms it with quiet satisfaction. The ceremony set for next month at the Cubide Shrine, but the servant lingers and adds that the previous queen, Princess Sienna and Prince Alas's mother, was so elegant and beloved that her memory still lives in the palace and still lives in this very garden she tended with her own hands, in every flower still blooming here years after her death. And Dio listens to all of it and then reaches over and plucks the flower the servant was holding and drops it onto the ground and grinds it under his foot, wanting everyone to know there is only one queen in the Western Theodore Empire, and it is his mother, and then he walks on. Sienna finds the garden in ruins. Flowers snapped from their stems, petals scattered across the ground like something went through it with intention. Neotis is already furious, demanding to know who dared reduce the previous queen's garden to this state. Sienna looks at the servants gathered around and asks which one of them did it. Every single one denies it. She looks at them all and tells them that none of them did it, but all of them watched, and that makes them just as responsible. She tells them they are coming with her to see the duty officer. Then the sky opens up. Rain starts falling, and as Sienna moves through the garden, she drops to her knees, picking up broken stems and crushed petals with her bare hands. Something about the weight of them in her palm pulls her backward. She is a child again in this same garden, running to her mother with the most beautiful flower she could find, her brother Alas beside her. Her mother telling them to slow down, mind that you don't fall. Sienna tucking the flower into her mother's hair and declaring that she loves Mama most. Her mother pulling them both close and telling them they will forever be her most precious treasures. Back in the rain, Sienna is still on the ground, holding the broken flowers, and she starts to cry. Dio stands dry under a nearby shade, watching her with his servants, and says quietly that this is only the beginning. Once his mother is made official queen, he will make sure Sienna suffers far worse than this. He turns and walks up the stairs, passing Latio on the way up. Latio's eyes follow him with the kind of stare that needs no words. Dio notices and keeps walking. Latio comes down into the rain and finds Sienna kneeling in the mud, tears running down her face. He looks at her for one moment and then pulls her into his arms, without a single word. He tells her quietly, directly into her ear, not to let her enemies see her like this, weak and exposed. But when it is just the two of them, she can cry as much as she needs to. Sienna grabs onto him and does exactly that. A few days later, Neotis is holding up dresses and asking Sienna which one she wants to wear to the ceremony. Sienna has already forgotten there is a ceremony. Neotis reminds her that the gladiator tournament is the event everyone in the kingdom is talking about, that the king ordered an entire coliseum built for it, and that every royal and noble is expected to attend the opening. Latio, sitting in the room, says plainly that he is an outsider and will not be going. Sienna immediately says she is not going either if he is not. Neota steps in before she can make it a decision, reminding her that this is exactly the kind of occasion she needs, a real opportunity to win back the king's attention and affection. And she cannot afford to let it pass. Then he adds that a group of Saga warriors will be competing in the tournament. He looks at Lachio when he says it. The Colosseum practically shakes apart as thousands of spectators surge to their feet and chant the glory of the Holy Western Theodore Empire, while gladiators pound swords against shields so hard that the noise rolls through the entire arena like thunder. The announcer calls for the king to open the games, and everyone expects him to bask in the attention. But instead, he turns toward the woman beside him and announces that the honor belongs to Antonia, because the Colosseum itself exists thanks to her idea. She accepts the scepter without a hint of hesitation, raises it high above her head, and declares the tournament open, which sends the crowd into absolute chaos as cheers erupt from every corner of the arena. Almost everyone is swept up by the excitement, but Sienna sits stiffly in her seat because while the spectators see a grand celebration, she sees something far less comforting. Things get worse when one of the defeated fighters collapses onto the blood-stained sand and uses his final breath to curse the arena along with everyone watching from the stands. Sienna is already on her feet before the last echoes disappear, demanding to know whether these men are even fighting by choice. But Dio looks at her as if the answer should be obvious and casually explains that they are prisoners of war. She immediately turns toward Lachio, hoping someone will tell her there is more to the story, yet his grim silence only makes the situation feel heavier. Master Muller steps in and quietly explains the rest. And with every detail, the truth becomes harder to ignore because these fighters are not only captured soldiers, civilians are dragged into the system as well. Women, children, and even the elderly are swept up during imperial campaigns before being forced into brutal contests where survival depends entirely on strength. The moment she hears that, Sienna openly declares that the entire tournament lacks any real integrity, and unfortunately for her, the king hears every word. His expression darkens at once, but before anyone responds, a blast of horns cuts through the tension and signals the beginning of the next battle. The matches that follow are merciless, and one fight bleeds into another as competitors fall, blood stains the sand, and the crowd roars for more. Eventually, the chaos narrows down to a single survivor, a red-haired warrior whose body looks ready to give out at any second. Sweat clings to him, his breathing comes in ragged bursts, and every step seems driven by sheer stubbornness rather than strength. But somehow, he remains standing. The atmosphere changes the instant the announcer reveals that he comes from Saga, because whispers spread through the audience while Dio leans back with open contempt and remarks that dogs will always be dogs. In his mind, there is no scenario where a Saga fighter leaves this arena victorious. And this is where things get interesting, because the gate on the opposite side of the arena suddenly begins to open. A warrior covered from head to toe in heavy armor steps into the sunlight, and the crowd immediately explodes with excitement because the outcome already seems decided. The difference between the two fighters is impossible to miss. One has endured multiple brutal battles and looks moments away from collapse, while the other enters fresh, armed, and fully protected behind layers of steel. Lachio watches the scene unfold, and something in his expression turns cold almost instantly. Sienna notices it right away, and instead of staying silent, she points toward the arena and loudly declares that the young warrior from Saga will survive and win no matter what. Dio only smiles because, from his perspective, she has chosen the one outcome with no chance of happening. As the two fighters stare each other down across the blood-stained arena, both Sienna and Lachio reach the exact same conclusion without exchanging a single word. This is not a fair duel because it never has been. The final battle is arranged from the very beginning, and every part of the arena seems built to push events toward a single result. The armored warrior is supposed to win, the exhausted survivor is supposed to fall, and everyone in the Colosseum appears ready to accept that outcome without question. The only uncertainty left is whether the young fighter from Saga realizes he is walking into a trap, because if he does, he gives absolutely no sign of it. As the two fighters face each other across the arena, both Sienna and Lachio come to the same realization. This duel is hopelessly uneven, yet the crowd could not care less. Thousands of spectators scream for the battle to begin, demanding blood and entertainment, and Sienna looks around in disbelief, because from where she is sitting, the entire audience seems to have lost its mind. The duel finally starts, and the armored warrior wastes no time as he crashes into the exhausted Sargerian, overwhelms his defenses, and knocks him flat onto the sand with a brutal shield strike. The crowd erupts while Sienna silently begs him to get back up. Lachio watches with a sad expression because the fight appears finished, but the young man lying on the ground refuses to accept defeat. His body is battered, his strength nearly gone, yet one thought keeps him moving. A Sargerian never yields, even against impossible odds. The armored warrior approaches for the killing blow, and all around the arena, smiles begin to appear. The king looks pleased, Antonia seems satisfied, and Dio watches confidently as Sienna closes her eyes, unable to watch what comes next. But instead of hearing the crowd celebrate, she hears silence. When Sienna opens her eyes, the impossible has already happened. At the last second, the Sargerian throws sand into his opponent's eyes, leaps behind him while the warrior stumbles forward, grabs a weapon, and strikes him from the back. The entire Colosseum freezes in shock. Sienna stares in disbelief, Antonia's composure cracks, and even the king looks stunned, while Lachio cannot help smiling as the armored warrior collapses into the sand. Somehow, against every expectation, the exhausted underdog wins. The king's shock quickly turns into fury. He rises from his seat and slaps the announcer, demanding to know how the so-called invincible champion of the Theodore Empire loses to a mere Sargerian. The terrified announcer explains that the warrior earns his place through countless victories and enters the arena as one of their strongest fighters, but that answer only angers the king further. Before the situation settles, Antonia calmly argues that the champion loses only because he fights honorably, while the Sargerian resorts to shameful tricks. Throwing dirt into an opponent's eyes, she claims, insults the god of war, and the barbarian's blood should be offered as atonement. The king immediately agrees and orders the Sargerian executed. Guards rush into the arena and force the exhausted victor onto his knees. A sword is drawn above his neck, ready to end his life despite his victory, and even Lachio looks shocked by how quickly the rules are abandoned. Just as the executioner prepares to strike, Sienna rises and shouts for them to stop. Every eye in the Colosseum turns toward her as Antonia politely asks what Princess Sienna wishes to say, and without hesitation, she points out the obvious. The Theodorian warrior is larger, stronger, better armed, and protected by superior armor, while the Sargerian enters the duel wounded, exhausted, and barely equipped. If anyone is treated unfairly, it is the young man kneeling in the sand. The announcer argues that all weapons used in the arena pass inspection and follow the rules, but Sienna immediately turns his own logic against him. If everything approved inside the Colosseum is allowed, then the dirt beneath a gladiator's feet is no different. Faced with death, the Sargerian uses the only weapon available to him, and nowhere do the rules forbid it. Even Lachio looks impressed by her argument. The king angrily tells her to hold her tongue, yet murmurs begin spreading through the crowd as more and more spectators admit she has a point. The Sargerian wins the duel fairly, and killing him now feels wrong. Sensing the mood changing, Sienna turns to her father and makes a single request. Spare his life. Set him free. Sienna rises to her feet and delivers her argument so clearly that even the noise of the arena begins to fade around her. Every weapon used in that fight is permitted the moment a fighter steps into the arena, and when the Saga youth finds himself moments away from death, he simply grabs the only weapon within reach. Dirt. He throws it, creates an opening, and wins. As far as she is concerned, he breaks no rule. The crowd begins to murmur, and those whispers quickly spread through the stands as more and more people admit she has a point. Killing him now feels wrong. Nearby, Lachio speaks her name, sounding equally worried and hopeful. But before anything else happens, the king slams his hand against the table and orders her to hold her tongue. Instead of backing down, Sienna takes an even bigger step forward and declares that the young man should not merely be spared, he should be set free. The entire atmosphere changes. The king is already preparing a response when Antonia grips his arm and beats him to it. With a smile that hides nothing, she dismisses Sienna's words as nonsense and claims her lack of a mother's guidance is finally showing itself. Worse still, she suggests that Sienna is intentionally humiliating the king in front of his own subjects. The attack lands exactly where it is meant to, but before Sienna has to face it alone, Lachio steps forward and places himself between her and the court. He openly declares that the princess is right and that the competition itself is unjust. That single statement pushes the king past his limit. Guards rush into the royal box and surround them from every direction while Master Muller quickly intervenes, pleading for mercy and blaming their actions on youthful naivety. Antonia immediately turns that argument against him, insisting that his constant protection is exactly why they continue challenging authority, and before long, the order comes down. Both of them are to be restricted and returned to the palace. Meanwhile, on the arena floor, the Saga youth's fate is already being decided. Guards approach and inform him that his time is up, while Antonia coldly orders his execution. Sienna calls out to her father one final time, but no answer comes. The young warrior lowers his head. The executioner raises his sword. The entire Colosseum falls silent, as thousands of people watch the blade begin its descent. Then everything changes. A single voice becomes 10. 10 become hundreds. Hundreds become thousands. Free him. Free him. Free him. The chant crashes through the arena like a tidal wave, shaking the very walls of the grand monument the king built to display imperial power. For a moment, nobody knows how to react. The king stares out at the crowd in shock, while Antonia looks equally blindsided by the sudden uprising of public opinion. Beside them, Sienna's eyes fill with emotion, and she instinctively reaches for Lachio's hand. Both of them stand there smiling as the chant grows louder and louder. Seeing the opportunity, Master Muller carefully approaches the king and reminds him what this Colosseum represents. It exists to unite the empire, to display strength, and to inspire loyalty among its people. Showing mercy to a champion beloved by the crowd would not make the empire appear weak. It would make it appear confident, strong enough to be merciful. The king considers those words carefully before finally making his decision. He orders Master Muller to strip the young warrior of his slave status and grant him his freedom. The response is immediate. The crowd erupts into celebration so loud that it nearly drowns out everything else. Overwhelmed by relief, Sienna throws her arms around Lachio and excitedly tells him that it is wonderful. She means every word. The king watches the scene with visible annoyance while Antonia observes quietly from the side, already deciding that one day she will teach that girl a lesson she will never forget. Down below, the Saga youth stands frozen for a moment as the reality of freedom settles over him. The cheers continue all around him, but his attention drifts upward until he finds Sienna and Lachio among the crowd. After a brief look, he turns and walks toward whatever future awaits him. Watching him leave, Sienna happily tells Lachio that they did it and that he will never have to fight as a slave again. Lachio's answer comes without hesitation. He was never a slave in the first place. He is a child of Saga. The words are simple, yet they linger between them as they stand hand in hand. Sienna looks at him, and although nothing outward changes, she suddenly feels the distance between them more clearly than ever before. While the kingdom of Saga bleeds at its borders, one furious prince storms toward the inner palace and nearly breaks through the guards blocking his path. They quickly stop him and explain that the king cannot be disturbed because he is currently enjoying a game with Prince Alas of the Western Empire. For a moment, Prince Camus simply stares at them in disbelief. Western Theodorian forces have been crossing into Saga, slaughtering civilians, capturing prisoners, and recently buried nearly 300 gladiator rebels alive. yet his father is spending his time playing games with a prince from that very empire. Realizing there is no point arguing, Camus turns away in disgust and leaves before his temper gets the better of him. His servant Giles quickly catches up and offers what little reassurance he can. The king has always favored peace over conflict, and his affection for Prince Alas only makes intervention less likely. Camus has no interest in hearing excuses. His father commands the full strength of Saga's military and refuses to use it, while he himself controls barely 100 guards and is forced to watch his people suffer. Then Giles quietly mentions that he might have a solution, although it depends on Prince Latio. That gets Camus' attention immediately. Giles leans close and whispers his idea, and whatever he says causes a sharp grin to spread across the prince's face. By the time the whispering ends, Camus is already imagining revenge. This time, he promises, the Western Empire will pay in blood. Meanwhile, back in the Western Empire, life looks completely different. Sienna and Lazio are running around the castle grounds with not a care in the world, while Neotis crouches inside a bush keeping an eye on them. Before long, Master Muller quietly appears beside him and insists that he is not spying on two young people enjoying themselves. He is merely fulfilling his educational responsibilities with the utmost professionalism. Neotis hears that explanation, pauses for a second, and simply responds with a knowing, ah. Neither of them leaves the bush. At the fountain nearby, Sienna excitedly tells Latio how speechless she was the first time she saw it and asks whether he finds it beautiful. He admits that it is magnificent, and noticing that his mood has remained gloomy ever since the arena incident, she quietly decides she is going to cheer him up whether he likes it or not. She begins telling him how her brother used to bring her to this fountain every year and explains that it bears her mother's family crest. While Latio is distracted by the story, Sienna suddenly points to a coin lying on the ground nearby. The moment he bends down to pick it up, the fountain sprays him directly in the face. Sienna immediately takes off running while laughing at her own trap, and Latio chases after her without hesitation. Unfortunately for him, the ground around the fountain is slick with water, so he loses his footing at the worst possible moment. The next thing either of them knows, they are crashing to the ground together in a tangled heap. For one awkward second, Sienna finds his face only inches from her own, and her heart nearly jumps into her throat. Then she shoves him away and bursts into laughter before either of them has to acknowledge what just happened. A short while later, Latio stands alone in the garden trying to wring the water out of his coat while wondering how one person can be as impossible as Sienna. As he works, he notices several female servants peeking at him through the bushes. The moment he looks their way, they scatter in every direction. Before he can think much about it, something far more important catches his attention. A scarlet bird lands nearby, and he recognizes it instantly as a messenger from his older brother. The bird allows him to remove the letter tied to its leg, and as he reads the contents, his expression slowly changes. Just as he reaches the end of the message, a familiar voice suddenly sounds from behind him. Startled, the scarlet bird takes flight and disappears into the sky while Latio instinctively closes his hand around the letter. Master Muller approaches casually, but Latio's thoughts are already racing. He carefully turns to face the older man, all while wondering a single thing. How much did Master Muller just see? Strangely, Master Muller never mentions the bird at all. Instead, he remarks that Latio smells different today. The scent is not from the palace. It is a fragrance produced specifically for the Saga royal family in Setu. For a split second, Latio feels the ground disappear beneath him. He hurriedly claims it must be a sachet he brought from home, but Master Muller studies him for a moment and points out that he always rubs his nose when he lies. More importantly, he has never worn that fragrance before. Latio searches for a response and finds absolutely nothing. Then, to his complete confusion, Master Muller simply ruffles his hair and tells him that if he is trying to win a girl's heart, drowning himself in perfume is not the strategy he would recommend. The old man sighs fondly, mutters something about youth, and walks on, leaving Latio standing there thinking, that was way too close. Master Muller leads him through the palace grounds until they arrive at the royal cemetery, a place Latio never expected to find beautiful. The grounds are peaceful, almost serene, and when he says as much, Master Muller agrees. He explains that in a few more days, the leaves will turn gold and blanket the earth like sunlight resting on the ground. As the old man bends down to pick up a fallen flower, Latio quietly realizes this is not a place he visits occasionally. This is somewhere he returns to again and again. The certainty settles over him before Master Muller suddenly speaks without even looking his way. The old man's voice is calm, but every word carries a weight that feels far heavier than the silence around them. He tells Latio that when he finally meets the girl he truly loves, he must never let go of her hand too easily. If he loses her, she may be gone forever, and with her will go the warmth of her smile, the comfort of her presence, and the feeling of belonging that only she can provide. Night after night, he will dream of her, and morning after morning, he will wake to loneliness, regret, and the knowledge that she is never coming back. Master Muller tells him not to make that mistake. Protect her smile for as long as he can. The cemetery falls silent again afterward, and Latio remains standing beside him without saying a word because some advice does not need an answer. Far away in the Eastern Empire, the atmosphere could not be more different. King Naya lounges across his palace, surrounded by wine, luxury, and beautiful women, while a servant kneels before him to report that the statue of the Goddess of Victory and all congratulatory gifts intended for the Western Empire are fully prepared. The king barely bothers to sit up as he lazily praises the work. Across from him sits Prince Camus, calmly raising his glass in response. Naya mirrors the gesture with a smile, declaring that he is certain the two of them will enjoy working together. According to him, it is finally time for the Western Empire to experience the Eastern Empire's famous hospitality. The smile on his face makes it clear that hospitality is the last thing he means. Camus returns the look without objection because both men understand exactly what is being discussed beneath the polite words. Their gifts, their congratulations, and their friendly gestures are only decorations covering something far more dangerous. The moment feels almost celebratory. as though they are already toasting a future victory. And to make his complete disregard for everyone around him even clearer, King Naya casually tips his cup and pours wine over the women beside him without sparing them a single glance, treating them like furniture while he and Camus quietly prepare for whatever comes next. Master Muller's words linger in the quiet cemetery long after he finishes speaking. Protect her smile forevermore. The advice carries the weight of a lifetime of regret, and although Lachio never responds, he does not need to. Standing beside the old man among the graves and fallen flowers, he understands exactly what is being said. Meanwhile, the Western Empire is celebrating. Soldiers march triumphantly through crowded streets while citizens pack every corner to welcome them home. Ladio slips through the crowd alone until someone taps his shoulder, and his instincts immediately take over. He spins around and grabs the person before realizing it is Sienna, who quickly complains that he is crushing her arm. The moment he lets go, he asks what she is doing in a crowd this dense because it is neither safe nor sensible. Sienna fires right back that if she had not caught him sneaking out alone, he would have watched the entire victory procession without telling her. Before he can argue, trumpets blast across the city, and the crowd erupts as an enormous golden statue of the goddess of victory rolls through the streets. The gift comes from King Naya of the Eastern Empire, and while everyone else admires it, Lachio immediately suspects there is another motive hidden beneath the generosity. As the procession advances, attention shifts to a decorated general riding atop a golden chariot. People nearby whisper that he is related to Empress Antonia, before quickly warning each other not to speak too loudly. Sienna recognizes him as one of Antonia's relatives and dismisses him entirely, but just as she starts to leave, Lachio grabs her hand and points farther down the road. Only then does she notice the chains trailing behind the chariot. At the other end are prisoners of war, exhausted and barely able to stand as they stagger through the streets. The situation becomes far worse when a small child collapses from exhaustion, and a guard immediately lashes them with a whip. Another prisoner instinctively reaches out to help and receives the same punishment. The crowd watches in silence until a single voice finally breaks through the noise and orders them to stop. It is Lachio. The soldiers initially treat him like an inconvenience, but the situation changes when General Caius personally approaches. One of his men describes Lachio and Sienna with open disrespect before Caius silences him and acknowledges their identities, although he noticeably remains on his chariot rather than showing the respect their status deserves. Sienna catches that immediately. Caius calmly informs them that this is not the Colosseum, and that freeing prisoners of war is something his battle-hardened soldiers would never tolerate. Sienna refuses to back down and asks whether children and elderly captives count as enemy combatants too. More importantly, she asks whether he feels any shame watching a defenseless child being beaten in front of everyone. Caius steps down from his chariot and kneels before the child with an almost unsettling calm. He explains that war is nothing like the sheltered world of the palace, and that sparing one seemingly harmless child today might cost tens of thousands of Theodorian lives tomorrow. Then he stands up and drives his blade straight through the child's heart. Everything inside Sienna seems to stop. Tears spill down her face before she even realizes she is crying, while Caius lifts the lifeless body into the air and declares it an offering to the god of war. Turning back toward her, he tells her that the comfortable life she enjoys has always been protected by people like him, people willing to commit horrors so she never has to. Ladio says nothing, but his clenched fists shake so violently that it becomes impossible to miss. There are people whose actions can be debated, and then there are people like Caius whose convictions are so absolute that words stop mattering. The walk back to the palace is painfully quiet. Neither of them knows what to say after witnessing something like that. Eventually, Sienna reaches for Latio's hand and softly calls his name, but he remains distant. She tells him she will see him tomorrow, and after a brief pause, he answers with a simple, yeah. It is such a small response, yet it leaves her feeling colder than before. As she watches him disappear down the corridor, fear begins creeping into her heart. She has walked these halls countless times without a second thought, but now she feels as though both of them are approaching a crossroads hidden somewhere ahead. Worse still, she fears turning around one day and realizing he never looked back. That night, Lachio sits alone in his room with his brother's letter spread open before him. The instructions are simple and direct. On the night of the full moon, he is to free the captive soldier, Fulop, and help him escape the palace. He reads the message one final time before holding it above a candle and watching the flames consume every word. The paper curls into ash, the last traces of the letter disappear into the darkness, and when Lachio finally looks out the window, there is no hesitation left in his eyes because somewhere between reading the order and burning it, he has already made his decision. The following day, the capital erupts into celebration. Victory banners hang from every street, crowds cheer until their voices crack, and the king stands proudly atop the grand podium, enjoying every second of the spectacle. General Caius kneels before him and presents the spoils of war, treasures seized from conquered lands, prisoners bound in chains, and the massive golden statue of the goddess of victory gifted by King Naya of the Eastern Empire. The king praises it all and announces a grand banquet to honor the soldiers who secured the empire's triumph. Nearby, Sienna finds herself staring at the towering statue and instinctively starts to call for Lachio before stopping. He is already there, but his attention is fixed entirely on the prisoners of war. The expression on his face is one she has seen before, and for the first time, she realizes there is nothing she can do to change it. That evening, the palace overflows with music, laughter, and celebration. Nobles raise their cups, soldiers boast about their victories, and the king sits at the center of it all, wearing the broad smile of a man convinced he is witnessing the peak of his reign. Yet while everyone else enjoys the festivities, Sienna's eyes drift toward an empty chair. Lachio's chair. The longer she stares at it, the more uneasy she becomes, and eventually a single thought refuses to leave her mind. Where did he go? Elsewhere in the palace, Master Muller quietly pulls several guards aside and warns them not to let the celebrations dull their vigilance. Moments later, movement near the dungeon catches his attention and immediately puts him on edge. At the dungeon entrance, two guards are sharing a laugh with Latio, joking that he must have skipped the banquet to visit his fellow Sigarians. The conversation ends abruptly. Before either man realizes what is happening, Latio kills them and slips inside. He moves through the dungeon with ruthless efficiency, cutting down anyone who tries to raise an alarm until he finally reaches Fulop and orders him to follow. They almost make it out before Master Muller appears alongside two more guards. The guards rush forward. Latio cuts them down as well. Then everything becomes quiet. Teacher and student stand facing one another with a sword between them, and Master Muller calmly reminds him what failure will cost. Not only his life, but his future, his place in the Empire, and Sienna herself. Latio lowers his gaze for a moment before admitting that if he abandons this mission, he will never be able to face himself again. He addresses him as Master one last time and apologizes in advance if he must force his way through. For several agonizing seconds, neither of them moves. Then Master Muller closes his eyes and steps aside. He tells Latio to go and asks only one thing in return: stop hurting the innocent. Neither of them notices that one wounded guard is still conscious, barely keeping an eye open as blood spreads across the stone floor. Latio leads Fulop and the other prisoners through the darkness, believing they are moments away from freedom. With the entire palace distracted by the banquet, the route seems clear. All they need to do is pass through the shadow of the massive golden statue and reach the outer entrance. But just as they approach the square, Fulop suddenly stops. Every prisoner stops with him. Confusion flashes across Latio's face as Fulop pulls out a metal hook and launches it toward the statue. The hook catches. A hidden seam opens. And in that instant, everything falls apart. The statue was never a gift. It was a weapon. Hidden compartments burst open, and soldiers begin pouring out from inside. Dozens upon dozens of armed warriors carrying torches and blades, flooding silently into the castle grounds. Within moments, the peaceful night erupts into chaos, as alarms ring out and fighting spreads across the courtyard. Latio watches in disbelief while Fulop and the others turn toward him, and the gratitude he expected to see is nowhere to be found. Instead, Fulop calmly reveals the truth. The rescue mission was never the goal. Freeing prisoners was merely the bait. The real objective was always this invasion. Standing amid the unfolding disaster, Latio finally understands what has happened. He was never rescuing anyone. He was opening the gates of the Western Empire from the inside. Latio stands in the middle of the burning courtyard and finally sees the truth for what it is. He was never rescuing prisoners. He was the key that opened the gate. And terrified officials scramble through smoke-filled corridors searching for the king. One escort is already dragging the king toward a secret passage while panic spreads faster than the fire itself. Niotis grabs Sienna and orders her to move, but she immediately looks around for Latio. The expression on Niotis' face says everything. There is no time. Not for questions. Not for him. Outside the city, citizens flee blindly through the streets while, far out on the water, King Naya sits comfortably aboard his ship, playing a harp and watching the capital burn. To him, the inferno is beautiful. His servants eagerly agree, and he laughs while telling the flames to keep burning as though he is watching a festival instead of a massacre. Meanwhile, Sienna pushes deeper into the destruction. Smoke chokes the air, burning debris crashes around her, and dying soldiers reach out from the ground as she desperately searches for one person. A wounded guard grabs her leg, but she tears herself free, snatches a fallen sword and shield, and keeps moving. Then she finally sees him. Through the smoke stands Latio, blade in hand, cutting down a guard. For a moment, she cannot move. Latio turns, spots her, and softly says her name, but the sound only makes things worse. Sienna raises her sword toward him and asks whether he was the one who brought these soldiers into the city. He does not deny it. She begs him to tell her it is not true, and even before the words leave her mouth, she already knows the answer. Latio says nothing. The silence breaks her more effectively than any confession ever could. Tears stream down her face as she asks who he really is, and all he can offer is an apology. The sword swings before either of them fully realizes it. The blade catches his stomach and leaves a shallow cut, but the moment blood appears, Sienna's strength vanishes. Her fingers release the weapon, and she stumbles backward in shock. Instead of attacking, Latio closes the distance between them. He pulls her into his arms and kisses her right there in the middle of a city consumed by fire. Sienna tries to pull away, but he refuses to let go, and when they finally separate, he looks at her as though he is trying to memorize every detail of her face before it disappears forever. Then Fulop's voice echoes through the smoke, warning that they must retreat immediately. The moment shatters. Latio whispers one final apology, knocks Sienna unconscious before she can call for help, and gently lowers her to the ground because no matter what else he has done, he cannot leave her to be found in the middle of the battlefield. I honestly don't know whether that was romantic or devastating. At this point, it somehow manages to be both. Out on the water, news reaches King Naya that Prince Alas has arrived with 2 full brigades of reinforcements. One of his servants asks whether they should assist Saga's forces now that the battle is turning against them. Naya's answer comes instantly. Retreat, no hesitation, no loyalty. No concern for Camus, Fulop, or the soldiers carrying out his plans. The moment the numbers stop favoring him, he abandons the entire operation without a second thought. Back in the city, Latio and the surviving infiltrators pull capes over themselves and disappear into the confusion, slipping through the wreckage while soldiers rush past in every direction. As they retreat, Latio passes a lone figure moving the opposite way. Recognition strikes both of them almost simultaneously. Prince Alas. For one suspended moment, they stare at each other in the darkness while the city burns around them. Then, Alas looks beyond Latio and sees a familiar figure lying motionless on the ground. Everything else ceases to matter. He sprints forward, drops to his knees beside Sienna, and gathers her into his arms while desperately repeating her name. Slowly, her eyes begin to open. Through blurred vision and fading consciousness, she sees her brother's face above her and manages the smallest smile she can muster. She softly calls him Big Brother. Alas. His voice trembles as he tells her that he is back. Behind them, unnoticed and unchallenged, Latio continues walking into the darkness without ever looking back. The city is still rebuilding when Prince Alas throws himself into the work. Temporary shelters rise inside undamaged buildings, food shipments pour in from surrounding regions, and reconstruction crews work around the clock to repair the inner city. In his office, stacks of documents seem endless as he signs one after another without pause. Watching from the window, Lyle mutters that Alas has not slept properly since returning, while the king spends his days enjoying himself in his chambers. Merlin immediately tells him to watch his mouth, and Lyle quickly backs down, though not before Alas orders him to keep his complaints under control. Only then does the prince finally stop writing long enough to thank Master Muller. He thanks him for managing the kingdom during his absence, for protecting Sienna, and for carrying burdens that were never truly his. As always, Master Muller accepts the gratitude with quiet humility and says he merely fulfilled his duty. The moment almost feels peaceful, until the office doors slam open and armed guards flood the room. The atmosphere changes instantly when they walk past everyone else and stop directly in front of Master Muller. Their order is simple. He is to come with them. Elsewhere in the palace, Neotis bursts into Sienna's room so quickly that he can barely get the words out. Master Muller has been arrested. The color drains from her face before he even finishes speaking. Moments later, the throne room fills with tension as Master Muller stands between two guards while the kingdom's highest officials watch in silence. A wounded guard kneels before the king and recounts what happened on the night of the attack. He explains that Latio struck him down in the dungeon and left him for dead, but because the wound missed his vital organs, he survived. More importantly, before losing consciousness, he witnessed something that has haunted him ever since. He saw Master Muller standing there while Latio and the prisoners escaped. He saw him allow them to leave without raising an alarm or lifting a hand to stop them. The accusation immediately draws a response from Alas, who warns the guard to think carefully about the seriousness of his claim. Yet the man refuses to back down and insists he saw everything with his own eye. The king eventually turns toward Master Muller and asks whether the accusation is true. Not even for a second does the old man flinch. He calmly admits that he intended to confess once the crisis had passed, but there is no reason to delay any longer. On that night, he allowed Prince Latio to leave. He believed the young man was acting out of compassion for weak and elderly prisoners, and he foolishly assumed the matter would end there. He never imagined it would grow into an invasion that nearly destroyed the capital. The confession barely leaves his mouth before Antonia laughs aloud. She dismisses his explanation as an insult to everyone's intelligence and points out that a man as careful and perceptive as Master Muller does not overlook schemes of that scale. According to her, his favoritism toward Latio has always been suspicious, and now he stands before the court openly admitting that he assisted an enemy prince during a time of war. Then she speaks the one word that changes everything: collusion. The official seize upon it immediately, and within moments, the entire room begins turning against him. The king listens to the arguments while the pressure of the court closes in from every direction. Then, rather than delivering judgment himself, he places the burden onto Alas. The decision shocks the room, and Antonia quickly praises the prince's fairness and integrity, making a point of saying she trusts him to remain impartial. Across the chamber, Merlin and Lyle exchange a look, because they both understand the impossible position he has been placed in. No answer will leave him unharmed. Through it all, Master Muller remains calm. He simply turns toward the young man he helped raise and quietly tells him that whatever judgment is passed, he will accept it without protest. At that very moment, Sienna is sprinting through the palace. She reaches the throne room doors and the guards attempt to stop her, but she forces her way through anyway. The timing could not be worse. She enters just as Alas's voice becomes steady, formal, and heartbreakingly final. He declares that although Master Muller's intentions may not have been treasonous, the consequences of his actions were undeniably so. Therefore, he finds him guilty. The sentence is death. Silence crashes over the throne room. Then Alas turns and sees Sienna standing at the entrance. For a brief moment, their eyes meet, and although her name rises into his thoughts immediately, he cannot bring himself to say it aloud. Sienna hammers against the tower door until her hands ache and her voice begins to fail. Again and again, she demands to be let out, but the guards stationed outside refuse to move. Through the thick wood, they explain that the king's orders are absolute. Master Muller's execution will proceed, and if they disobey those orders, they will join him in punishment. Desperate, Sienna turns to Neotis and grabs hold of him, asking whether he truly intends to stand aside this time. Neotis's expression tightens because there is no answer she wants to hear. As gently as possible, he tells her that Master Muller was taken to the execution grounds early this morning. Even if she escaped this tower right now, she would never arrive in time. With nothing else left to say, he leaves. The guards leave with him. The silence that follows feels unbearable. For a while, she remains slumped against the door, shouting after them that Master Muller is innocent, that he never betrayed the kingdom, that they all know it. Eventually, her voice breaks apart into a hoarse whisper. The anger drains away, the desperation remains. Sitting alone in the empty room, she forces herself to think of a solution, but every path ends in failure. Then, her eyes drift toward the window and her breath catches. Someone is standing there. For one impossible moment, she sees Latio. She blinks. The figure is gone. The window is empty. Logic tells her it was never real. There is no way he could be there. No way he could have climbed to this tower. No way he could be anywhere near the capital after what happened. Yet even after the image disappears, his voice remains. Not literally, not truly. It is the memory of him, the part of him she still carries despite everything. The same voice that once encouraged her when she doubted herself. The same voice that always told her she was stronger than she believed. She hears it telling her to trust herself, to believe, to keep moving. At some point, she stops questioning whether it is real, because the answer no longer matters. What matters is that she cannot sit here and do nothing. A fierce determination suddenly pushes aside the fear. Sienna rushes to the window, climbs onto the ledge, and looks down at the dizzying drop below. Any sensible person would hesitate. Any sensible person would turn back. Sienna has run out of sensible options. Taking one final breath, she jumps. The impact nearly knocks the air from her lungs, but she forces herself upright and starts running before the pain can catch up to her. She races across the palace grounds, reaches the stables, and chooses the first horse she can reach. There is no careful preparation, no planning, only urgency. She throws herself into the saddle and takes off at full speed, the wind tearing through her hair as the world blurs around her. Somewhere ahead lies the execution ground. Somewhere ahead stands the man who spent years protecting her, teaching her and believing in her. As the horse charges forward, she remembers something Latio once told her. Do not fight the horse. Trust it. Let it feel where your heart wants to go, and it will carry you there. Clinging to that memory, Sienna leans forward and rides harder than she ever has in her life. The morning is slipping away. Every second feels stolen. Every heartbeat feels late. And through it all, one desperate thought repeats itself over and over in her mind. Wait for me. Please wait for me. As Sienna rides, memories begin surfacing one after another, scattered fragments of a lifetime spent under Master Muller's guidance. She remembers him standing over her during sword practice, correcting her grip and warning that a careless hand would send her weapon flying. She remembers him tapping her knuckles whenever she drifted away from her studies and telling her to stop fooling around. Most of all, she remembers the countless times he patiently explained why knowledge mattered, why understanding the difference between right and wrong was the foundation of justice itself. The memories keep coming, each one making her ride faster. Then she remembers his final words before the guards took him away. He told her he would no longer be able to act as her shield. He told her she would have to take care of herself from now on. He even found room to remind her not to torment future instructors the way she tormented him. The thought nearly breaks her, but instead she urges the horse forward and rides even harder. By the time she reaches the execution grounds, it is already too late to mistake what is happening. The crowd is massive and vicious, hurling stones while shouting traitor and every insult they can think of. Through all of it, Master Muller walks toward the guillotine with his head held high and his expression calm. There is no panic, no anger, only quiet acceptance. When Alas asks whether he has any final words, the old man looks out across the crowd for a long moment. Somewhere in that sea of faces, he imagines Sienna. A faint smile touches his thoughts. Then he closes his eyes and simply says no. At that exact moment, chaos erupts at the gates. Sienna bursts through on horseback, screaming his name at the top of her lungs. Guards scatter out of her path while people stumble aside in confusion. She fights her way through the crowd with every ounce of strength she has left, but fate refuses to give her even a few extra seconds. The horse crashes beneath her. She hits the ground hard. Still, she keeps moving. She crawls through the dirt on her hands and knees, desperately calling out for him while the announcer's voice rises above the noise and declares that the sentence will now be carried out. She is still reaching for him when the blade falls. The crowd explodes into cheers. Sienna stops moving. For a moment, the world seems to lose all sound and meaning. Somehow, she forces herself to her feet and climbs the execution platform on legs that barely function. Then she sees it. The sight she crossed half the kingdom to prevent. The sight she arrived seconds too late to stop. What leaves her throat is no longer language. It is grief in its purest form. Behind her, Alas wraps his arms around her and holds on as tightly as he can, but there is nothing he can do. Around them, the crowd celebrates what they call justice. They cheer, they laugh, they move on. Sienna cannot. All she can think about is Master Muller's smile, and the way he once told her that seeing her smile was his greatest happiness. And now, standing on that platform, she realizes she never told him that seeing his smile made her happy too. Far across the sea, the world looks completely different. The ship carrying Latio and Fulop finally reaches the port of Setu, just as the evening sun settles over the horizon. Fulop informs him that they have arrived, but Latio says nothing. He simply walks to the edge of the vessel and stares at the shoreline waiting before him. This is the land he left behind. The land he fought for. The land that shaped him long before he ever stepped foot in the Western Empire. When the ship docks, he steps onto the shore and immediately crouches down, pressing his hand into the sand as though he needs to feel it for himself. For a long time, he remains there in silence with the soil of his homeland between his fingers. Then, in a voice barely louder than the waves themselves, he finally speaks. He says he has arrived. The officials assigned to receive Latio politely advise him to rest before the formal welcome ceremony. His wounds are still fresh, and the journey has taken its toll. Latio simply tells them he understands, and once they leave, he steps outside to watch the city of Setu breathe around him. Everything about the capital feels familiar, yet somehow distant. The streets are busy, the people are disciplined, and even the atmosphere carries the tension of a nation that has spent generations preparing for war. In the courtyard below, children swing wooden swords at one another while arguing over who will win. A young girl confidently declares that she will beat her opponent this time, while the boy immediately tells her not to get ahead of herself. The scene should be harmless, but as Latio watches them, his thoughts drift somewhere else. Suddenly, he is back in the Western Empire, back in the burning courtyard. Back to the moment Sienna stood before him with a sword pointed at his chest. The memory hits so sharply that he instinctively presses a hand against the wound on his stomach. Before the thoughts can pull him any deeper, another burst of noise rises from the street. More children are playing at war, loudly reenacting battles between Saga and Theodoria. One boy proudly shouts that he will destroy the Theodorian enemy in the name of King Egnor and the war god Boru. Another immediately interrupts to point out that Boru has been dead for years. The first boy refuses to back down and insists that Boru was a legendary hero who fought beside the king and remains the greatest warrior Saga has ever produced. The argument continues until a third child throws up his hands and complains that he is tired of always being forced to play the Theodorian. This time he wants to be the young prince. He wants to be Latio, the prince who slew the lion and took its heart because, in his opinion, that role is much cooler. The first child agrees on one condition. He has to call him daddy first because everyone knows the great war god Boru was Prince Latio's father. The response comes instantly. Absolutely not. Despite himself, Latio almost smiles before turning away from the window and retreating inside, his hand still resting against his wound. Unfortunately, the momentary distraction only opens the door for another memory. He is a child again, small enough to hide beneath a carriage while chaos unfolds around him. Arrows rain down. Soldiers shout accusations, and in front of him, his father Boru falls. They call him a traitor. They tell him his time has come. Young Latio desperately screams for him, but terror roots him to the spot. He cannot move. He cannot help. All he can do is watch. Then, through the fear and confusion, another figure appears. A hand reaches down toward him. The man introduces himself as Egnor, his uncle. He promises that from this day forward, Latio will live beneath the same roof as his own children, eat at the same table, and receive the same care and respect. He promises him a future. He promises him family. Young Latio reaches up and takes that hand, but the image of his father's death never leaves him. Even years later, he still carries its weight. A familiar voice suddenly cuts through the memories and drags him back to the present before he can sink any deeper. Camus. His older brother strides toward him with a grin already spreading across his face. The moment he reaches him, he throws both arms around Latio and pulls him into a tight embrace. There is no hesitation, no restraint, only genuine relief. Camus tells him how much taller and stronger he has become and admits that he is truly grateful to see him return safely. For the first time since arriving in Setu, Latio relaxes enough to return the embrace. But when they finally separate, something changes. He studies Camus quietly, and the warmth in his expression fades into something more complicated. There are questions he wants answered, things he needs explained. A great deal sits behind his silence. For now, though, he chooses not to speak. He simply looks at his brother and keeps those thoughts to himself. The blood on the execution platform never leaves Sienna's mind. Long after the crowd disperses and the cheers fade away, the image remains as clear as the moment it happened. She remembers Alas holding her while the people around them celebrated what they called justice, and she remembers crying until there was nothing left inside her to give. The grief does not lessen with time. If anything, it settles deeper. Several days later, Archie is in the stables, aggressively scrubbing her horse with enough force to make the animal restless. The brush drags harshly across its coat until the horse finally startles, and from across the yard, Alas immediately notices. He walks over, gently takes hold of her hand, and tells her she cannot keep punishing herself like this. She has to come back to him. The words break through the fragile wall she has been holding together. Tears spill down her face before she can stop them, and she tells him that when she was isolated, powerless, and alone, it was Latio and Master Muller who stood beside her. They protected her when nobody else did. Now one is gone forever, and the other has vanished from her life. Alas quietly tells her he understands, but the moment the words leave his mouth, she pushes him away. Sienna demands to know how he could understand. Those two were not distant acquaintances or passing companions. They mattered. They were important to her in ways she cannot even put into words, and she wants to know whether her pain means anything to him at all, or whether it is simply another problem that needs to be managed. The question hangs between them. Alas looks at her, but no answer comes. Eventually, she removes his hand from hers, turns around, and walks away. This time, he does not stop her. He simply watches her leave. Later that day, Alas moves through the palace halls with the calm authority of someone who has become the true center of the kingdom. Servants bow as he passes, guards step aside, and even the atmosphere seems to shift around him. Then he crosses paths with Antonia and Dio. He does not stop. He does not speak. He merely looks at them as he walks past, and somehow that is enough. Dio instinctively recoils and stumbles sideways into his mother. Antonia collides with the wall, regains her composure, and immediately turns her frustration on her son. She slaps him and calls him pathetic for being intimidated by a prince. Yet beneath her anger, another thought is already taking shape. Alas is becoming too powerful. If he continues like this, removing him later may become impossible. Inside his office, Alas stands before a portrait of Latio, the only one remaining in the palace. He stares at it for so long that Lyle eventually grows uncomfortable and points out that this must be the man Sienna has completely fallen for. Alas sets the portrait down, and when Lyle accuses him of having a sister complex, he does not even bother denying it. He admits that Sienna is grown now and has someone she loves, but none of that changes what she is to him. In his heart, she remains the little girl who followed him everywhere and clung to his sleeve whenever she got scared. She is still his most precious treasure. Merlin quietly points out that she is also his greatest weakness. Alas immediately agrees. There is not even a moment of hesitation. Then he calmly adds that she is also the person he intends to protect for the rest of his life. If anything should ever happen to him, Merlin and Lyle must protect her in his place. The request lands heavily in the room. Lyle immediately complains and tells him to stop speaking as though he is predicting his own death, because it invites bad luck. Alas simply waves both men toward the door. Lyle leaves grumbling as usual, while Merlin departs in thoughtful silence. By the time he reaches the hallway, he has already made up his mind. It is time to visit Princess Sienna. Sienna is slumped at the garden table with birds pecking around her when Merlin arrives, and Dio watches from the bushes and disappears the moment he sees him coming. And Sienna sits up as Merlin approaches because he wastes no time at all, telling her that tears are a human weapon and that some people use them for money and others for power. And he wants to know what she is using hers for, sympathy or comfort or just to hide her own cowardice and stupidity. But he does not wait for an answer, because he is already telling her about the breadth of a barrel, that what limits a barrel's capacity is not its length but its breadth, and that she is Prince Alas's breadth, his limiting factor, his ceiling, and he slams his hand on the table and tells her she only drags her brother down, that she is a burden and a hindrance worth nothing beyond the title she was born into. And then he lifts her chin and advises her to stop crying where people can see her, and he turns to leave while Sienna finds her voice enough to ask who he thinks he is, and he looks back and tells her plainly that he is Prince Alas's military advisor, Merlin, before walking away and leaving her sitting alone with all of it. Back in Setu, Latio rides through the palace in a covered carriage. At the same time, Camus tells him quietly that his return needs to stay quiet for now because announcing it publicly could give Theodore justification to strike in retaliation, and Latio thanks him for thinking ahead. When they reach the inner palace, he steps out. T and Camus tells him their father is waiting in the throne room and that he has missed him very much. Latio smiles for what feels like the first time in a long time before walking in, and he sees King Egnor and bows and begins climbing the steps toward him. Still, then he notices it, a wound on the king's neck, and before he can process what he is seeing, the throne room doors burst open. Guards flood in, screaming that someone has attempted to assassinate the king and demanding they seize the regicidal bastard, and every finger in the room points at Latio, who stands frozen on the throne room steps and stares at Camus, and Camus looks back at him. In the punishment room deep inside Setu Palace, Latio is chained and bleeding. At the same time, Camus stands over him with a belt and tells him that King Egnor treated him like his own flesh and blood, and this is how he repays it, that he already betrayed Saga for the Theodorians. Latio tells him he did not, but the belt comes down anyway. Blood sprays across Camus's face, and an official steps in and tells Camus that the kingdom cannot go without leadership while the king recovers, and that he needs to step in and handle national affairs and leave the interrogation to them. Camus looks at Latio one last time with a smile that carries no warmth in it whatsoever before dropping the belt and walking out. Latio looks up at the guard still standing over him and tells him there is no need to show mercy. The guard calls him worthless scum who conspired to murder the king and raises his hand again, while behind the fury in Latio's eyes, there is one image he cannot shake: Camus smiling. That same night in the Western Theodore Empire, Dio drifts through the hallways thinking about Sienna and feeling something close to satisfaction, deciding she brought it on herself by getting attached to that Sagarian and to Master Muller, both of them always making things difficult for his mother. But then the memory of Alas's glare in the corridor surfaces and Dio's satisfaction curdles slightly, and he straightens up and reminds himself he is a prince too and tells himself he is not afraid anymore. And then he notices the light still burning in his mother's chambers and stops because it is late, and he moves to the window and looks in. And there stands a gladiator with Antonia and her companion, and Dio watches his mother press a small vial into the gladiator's hand and tell him that Alas's retinue has already been sent away on a false errand, and his chamber guards have been replaced. And all the gladiator needs to do is dress as an attendant and put the contents of that vial into Alas's wine. And once the deed is done, everything he wants will be within reach. And the gladiator says yes and pockets it. And outside the window, Dio goes completely still, thinking the word poison before he can stop himself, and then thinking the next thought even slower. His mother is planning to kill Alas. Latio hangs from the ceiling of the punishment room, wrists bound above him and feet not touching the ground, body covered in bruises. At the same time, 2 guards sit beneath him, eating from a pot and talking about an auxiliary minister in Theodore who was just sent to the gallows for colluding with Saga. The other guard figures it was a political setup, and Latio asks for the man's name. Still, one guard gets up and drags the belt across his face and tells him a man barely clinging to life has no business asking questions and that he is clearly ready for another round. Hence, Latio waits until the guard's face is close enough and then bites down on the man's ear and does not let go until blood runs. And while the guard screams, Latio asks again, quiet and precise. What was the name of the person they executed? The other guard, backing away in panic, says he thinks it was Mew Muller, and the room goes silent except for the guard still howling. Latio hangs there, and the tears come before he can do anything about them, and then the rope gives and he drops to his feet. Something shifts in him that does not shift back. He walks toward the door, and every guard who tries to stop him finds out very quickly that the punishment room held something far more dangerous than they were told. And he breaks through all of them and walks out into the night and looks up at the sky with the kind of anger that has nowhere left to go. In the Western Empire, Sienna is in the courtyard in the dead of night, running Neotis into the ground with sword drills until he begs for mercy, and she tells him to get up and press on. But he suggests that perhaps reading books or practicing the lute might be a gentler alternative given that she just recovered, and then Merlin's words come back to her unbidden, that she is worth nothing beyond the title she was born with, and she stops and asks Neotis quietly if she is truly that useless, and Neotis says her name like a protest. But she raises her sword again and tells him the truth while she trains, that she has always appeared headstrong but only because everyone around her was doing the protecting. Master Muller, Latio, alas, and she does not want to be anyone's burden ever again. And she knocks the sword clean out of Neotis' hand, and it spins through the air and drives itself into the wall directly in front of Dio, who is passing by and loses approximately 10 years off his life in a single second. Neotis recovers first and identifies him cheerfully, and Sienna immediately asks if he is hurt and closes in to check, and Dio has a small cut on his hand. Before he can minimize it, Sienna is already thinking that she cannot let him run to their father about this, so she tells him Alas's chambers are nearby. She will bring him there to get it treated, and Dio's entire composure collapses at the mention of Alas. He says, no, it is just a small cut. He is completely fine. But Sienna tells him to wait while she runs to grab ointment from her brother's room, and Dio grabs her hand, and she stops and looks at him, and his face is not angry or entitled or calculating. It is terrified. Dio's hand tightens around Sienna's wrist, and his voice comes out smaller than she has ever heard from him, telling her, don't go. She looks at his face and asks why. And he tells her that Alas's life is in danger, and if she goes over there, she will get killed too. And when she asks how he knows that, he looks at her and says that is all he can tell her, and Sienna pulls her hand free and runs. Meanwhile, in the throne room, the king and Antonia clink glasses while Lyle and Merlin stand across the room watching dancers move between the tables. Antonia tells the king that since the victims have been appeased, the rebellion quashed, largely thanks to 2 ministers who worked tirelessly through it all, it is only fitting to reward them tonight, and the king calls her thoughtful. Lyle starts to say something about Alas, but Antonia cuts smoothly across him, telling them both that tonight is simply about gratitude and that they should forget national affairs for one evening and enjoy themselves. Lyle and Merlin thank the king and sit, and a dancer fills Lyle's cup. At the same time, Merlin does not touch his drink, sitting quietly and thinking instead. In Alas's office, the room is still and calm, and Alas writes at his desk while a new attendant sets down a cup of tea beside him, and Alas thanks him without looking up, but then he reaches for the cup and stops, looking at the attendant's face and realizing he has never seen this man before in his life. And the attendant explains smoothly that he was recently promoted from kitchen duty, and that Alas has simply been too busy to notice. And Alas says ah and reaches for the cup again. But then the doors fly open and Sienna bursts in calling his name, and Alas looks up startled and Sienna tells him to run because it is dangerous here. And the attendant's composure breaks as he draws his sword and tells them neither of them is going anywhere, and he swings at Alas, who dodges the first strike cleanly, but the second catches his arm. And Alas grabs the wound while pain moves across his face, and Sienna shouts for help, but the gladiator tells her it is useless, that everyone in this palace tonight has been positioned against them. And the words land like a stone dropped into still water, and then he turns the blade towards Sienna, and she raises her sword and blocks it, and behind her, Alas shouts her name, but Sienna does not step back, thinking to herself that this time she will be the one doing the protecting. The gladiator steps back and removes his disguise, smiling at her like this is already over. Sienna looks at him and hears Master Muller's voice in her head telling her to keep a tight grip. They clash again, and this time the gladiator gets through, catching her arm. Then her leg buckles from a strike she does not see coming, and she cries out in pain. Alas shouts from behind her, telling her to stop, that this has nothing to do with her. Sienna looks back at her brother and then turns forward again with everything she has left. Master Muller's words come back to her. Even the most powerful enemies have a weak point, and you usually only get one shot at it. She watches the gladiator, R, and she waits. When the moment comes, she drops low and drives her strike straight into his ankle. He goes down hard with his weapon falling from his hand, and Sienna points her sword at him while he lies there, insisting he was only following orders and spent his whole life doing what he was told. She hesitates for just a second. That second is all it takes. The gladiator spins her around and throws her to the ground, wrenches the sword from her hand and raises it to finish her. Sienna looks up at the blade coming down, and there is nothing she can do. Then there is a body in front of her. Alas. The sword goes through his back instead of hers. Blood comes from his mouth, H, and he turns to look at her and says he is sorry, that he was not able to protect her, that he was not able to protect the country. Then he falls into her arms. Sienna holds him and calls his name over and over. The gladiator reaches down and picks her up and tells her she will be joining her brother in the afterlife. He swings, and she bends just enough that the blade only catches her hair. She looks at him with tears still on her face and something that is not grief anymore. She tells him to go to hell. Then she picks up the sword and drives it into his neck. He falls and does not get up. She goes back to her brother. She holds him and keeps saying his name, and the tears do not stop. Through all of it, one name keeps rising in her chest until it becomes the only thing left. She says she will never forgive Antonia. She keeps saying it, voice breaking and then hardening, and the name becomes a promise. Outside the palace, the building is on fire, and the flames are already beyond what anyone can control. Neotis stands watching with his heart in his throat. Lyle tries to run in, and Merlin stops him, telling him it is too dangerous. Lyle shouts that Alas is in there. The king orders his guards to save Alas immediately. Antonia stands beside him, holding his arm and telling him to compose himself, while servants with water say it is impossible to get any closer and that this fire cannot be extinguished. Then Antonia's face changes. She sees something through the smoke and flames, someone coming out, and then she sees what that person is carrying the body of Alas. Antonia stares and says he is still alive. In the Saga Kingdom, Lacio walks out through the doors with his bodyguards, and the moment he steps outside, one of them shouts that he is a demon. He stops, looks up at the sky, and breathes. Then, he mounts his horse and rides, carrying the weight of every death he has counted and every vow he has yet to fulfill, his father's territory of Ludo, somewhere behind him in memory and everything ahead still unresolved. The guards come after him fast, shouting at each other to ride faster because they are gaining on him. Latio glances back, pulls his knife, and strikes one of them cleanly. The man shouts as he falls from his horse. The remaining guard shouts not to fall off and pushes to force Latio toward the cliff edge. Latio sees it too late. His horse clears the jump, but he does not. He is left in the air, falling, and as he drops, he sees a figure on horseback holding a bow with an arrow already released. Then the cliff takes him. Below, a man addresses a young king named Camus and offers his congratulations. Every threat has been eliminated by his own hand, the man says, and now no one may challenge his right to the throne. Camus stands there with tears quietly forming in his eyes and gives one order: retrieve the body. Across the world in the West Theodore Empire, Sienna wakes up with her heart pounding hard. A figure is beside her and tells her she is awake, addressing her as Prince Alas. Sienna starts to answer and then catches herself and coughs, buying a moment to lower her voice before asking how long she was unconscious. Merlin tells her it has been quite several days. She leans back against the bed and immediately feels the pain of her injuries, and Merlin adjusts her bandages and tells her to hold still because her bones have not fully healed. He continues his report. The king has tightened security around her temporary chamber. Lyle stands guard outside her door around the clock. Neotis was gravely injured and has not yet regained consciousness, but his life is not in danger, and her true identity has not been exposed. That last part makes her go very still. Merlin explains that after she emerged from the fire, she was placed in the care of doctors, and that by cutting her hair, deepening her voice, and relying on her near-identical appearance to Alas, a cover was maintained. However, he makes no effort to soften what he says next. If she thinks she can seamlessly assume Prince Alas's identity using these methods alone, she is deeply mistaken. Alas surpassed her in wisdom and intelligence. In conduct, bearing, and manner, there is not a single aspect in which she matches him, and those who knew Alas personally will see through her at the first real test. Sienna lies there and lets that land. She thinks about who she used to be, someone who believed she could do anything she set her mind to and go wherever her heart desired, someone who made promises to Latio about staying together and meant every word. She understands now that she was naive. She could not protect anyone, but Alas was different. He was capable and accomplished, and able to shield far more people than she ever could, and he should not have been the one to die. She should have been. So she will live in his place, take his name, carry his weight, and get revenge on his behalf. Not because she is enough, but because he deserves someone who was, and she is all that is left. Merlin listens to all of it, and then he reaches out and lifts her chin so she has to look at him directly. Very good, he says. As she wishes, he will mold her into Alas Theodore. Sienna looks back at him with something new in her eyes. Not the girl who climbed fences and launched surprise attacks with a wooden sword. Someone older. Someone with a debt to pay. He finds himself wandering through a strange, empty world. Memories begin flashing before his eyes. A cheerful girl runs beside another woman while calling for Latio to wait, and even Matthew joins the laughter. Then a blinding light bursts across the sky. It burns his eyes so badly that he curses it, only to wake up and realize the golden light is real. Beside him, Sienna sleeps peacefully, leaving him completely stunned. Before he reaches her, huge, thorny branches block his path. And this is where things get interesting. Standing beyond them is another version of Latio dressed in black, with Liam beside him. The stranger calmly reveals he is another Lazio and warns that endless suffering waits ahead. He claims the real Lazio is walking toward disaster and soon the person he loves most will be taken away. Those words hit hard, but things turn even stranger when Sienna wakes up. She stares at the second Lazio in complete confusion, unable to understand how two of them exist at the same time. The dark double pulls Sienna close as if she belongs to him, while she mistakes him for the real Latio. Watching all of this leaves the real one furious. His body suddenly burns with a strange heat, and Sienna quickly notices something is wrong. Meanwhile, the other Latio keeps whispering dark promises. He claims kindness is weakness, and says only bloodshed leads to true power. Then he warns that if Latio follows that path, everything precious to him will eventually become a sacrifice. Honestly, this version of Latio is nothing but bad news. The two stand on opposite sides with Sienna caught right in the middle, turning the whole moment into a battle for his future. Then Latio suddenly opens his eyes back in the real world. A man named Heinkel stares at him in complete shock and blurts out that he has come back from the dead. And after everything he just saw, waking up might only be the beginning of an even bigger nightmare. Outside the room, guards hang with chains and arrows visible on their bodies, a reminder of exactly how dangerous the world outside this place currently is. Inside, Heinkel serves Latio food and tells him to eat more, that they may not have much, but their bellies are always full. Latio looks at the plate and thinks privately that he is not entirely sure what he is looking at. The guards in the room start whispering among themselves, wanting to know who this young man is and why the boss not only dragged him back from death's door, but is now sitting beside him like they are equals. Heinkel hears every word, turns around, and knocks one of them without ceremony, telling them to stop talking about the young man like that because he is no ordinary person and once saved his life in the arena. He then tells them plainly that Latio is saga royalty. The guards immediately recalculate and decide this is actually excellent news for their career prospects. Latio stands up abruptly and the food goes with him. Heinkel tells him not to be hasty and then leans in close and lowers his voice. He explains the situation clearly. Latio has been branded a regicidal killer, and people are actively searching for his body. If Heinkel had wanted to hand him over, he would have done it long ago. Moving around on his own right now with wounds covering his entire body would be dangerous and stupid. Heinkel knows where the person Latio is looking for can be found, and he is offering himself as both shield and escort. Latio looks at him and asks directly why he would put his neck on the line and what his real agenda is. Heinkel grins, slaps his arm, and says it is simple. When Latio makes it big, he wants a spot in his entourage. Back in the Eternal City in the West Theodore Empire, the room looks like something went through it at speed. Broken vessels everywhere. Merlin stands holding one of them and tells Sienna to continue, pointing out that when she was a princess, she lacked the appearance and demeanor the role required, and now she must build exactly that from the ground up. Sienna stands with a vase balanced on her head and says yes. The training begins in earnest, covering bearing and posture, military affairs, political systems, and physical fitness. And Merlin approaches all of it with the energy of someone who does not believe in rest. Late at night in Alas's office, Sienna is at the desk reading when her eyes start to close, and Merlin taps the table beside her and asks if she committed everything to memory and tells her to recite it back. Sienna snaps awake and recites without missing a beat, explaining the structure of the Crusader Combined Corps, the 2 legions and 2 auxiliary legions led by a single archon, and the authority of the deputy archon over 1 legion and 1 auxiliary. Merlin listens, marks his board, and tells her to go on. Outside in the mud, Sienna is carrying a bag so heavy her knees are giving out, and when she hits the ground, Merlin tells her to get up and press on without even breaking his stride. She says it is really too heavy, and then she falls back into the mud. She asks herself if this is really her breaking point. Merlin looks down at her and asks if this matches Prince Alas's endurance and stamina. Sienna answers that it does not by a long shot. Merlin tells her that is the correct answer, and that if she wants to take Alas's place without anyone seeing through her, she still has a very long way to go. Sienna gets up. She picks up the bag and she keeps moving. Merlin watches her and thinks to himself that perhaps this small frame is capable of carrying an entire ancient kingdom out of the darkness it has fallen into, and of becoming the light it desperately needs. Not long after, Sienna and Merlin stand in front of her presumed grave. She looks at it and places a white rose among the others already there, thinking about the people in this palace who are still grieving for her, and then thinking about him, wondering what Latio will do when he inevitably hears that she is gone. She pushes the thought aside and turns to Merlin, asking why they cannot simply go to the king and tell him that Antonia sent men to assassinate Alas. Merlin tells her they have no evidence, and that making accusations without proof will only alert the enemy. Sienna thinks about Antonia's connections, her family's backing, and her father's protection, and she understands. Rushing in will accomplish nothing. She makes a quiet promise to her brother instead. She will find the proof. This time, Antonia will be damned for what she has done. Inside the palace, Antonia is standing over Dio, who is on the ground in pain after being struck, and she is calling him worthless garbage and telling him he does not hold a candle to Alas, and demanding to know how someone like him expects to be king. Dio tells her from the floor to stop trying to harm Alas, and she rounds on him and asks if he pities him, if he wants to play the saint, telling him everything she does is for his sake. Dio tells her he never asked for any of this and that he does not want to be king. The sound of another slap fills the room. Outside the palace, Sienna walks with Lyle and Merlin while Lyle briefs them on the investigation. The mark on the gladiator's killer points to a labor union whose office has been located. The owner is a man named Old Man Pero, a former subordinate of Antonia's clan with a reputation for pursuing profit at any cost. On the surface, the operation presents itself as a gladiators guild, but underneath it functions as the territory of local despots, running shady dealings for nobles, including assassinations. Sienna looks over and notices 2 carriages loaded with spices nearby, and she observes the gladiators moving around them. She says nothing yet. She just watches. Meanwhile, in the Saga Kingdom, in a city called Ahemo, Heinkel and his men are trying to get their carriage through the city gates. A guard stops them, and Heinkel explains smoothly that they are travelers delivering goods from the harvest, fresh and dried produce, and the yard has already tasted it and found it good. The guard asks why he is sitting outside the wagon instead of riding in it, and Heinkel says his master has come down with a fever and is holding on inside, and just as he says it, one of his men staggers forward coughing blood. The guard recoils and waves them through immediately, telling them to move along. Heinkel thanks him profusely and hurries the group forward, and they almost make it, but then a commander appears, and the mood shifts completely. Every guard and bystander bows. The commander looks at the wagon and tells them to seize everyone and bring them in. In the next room, the king sits and looks over Heinkel and his men, asking why someone who already has his hands full with the Western Mountain Range is now starting a food business, and wants to know what trouble Heinkel has gotten himself into this time. Heinkel looks at the wagon and tells Lord Ludo he will not lie, that there will be serious consequences for this one, and then he opens the door. Even the guards go still at what steps out. Lord Ludo stares, and then he steps down from his throne and walks toward Lachio and bows. Every guard in the room stares in disbelief. Heinkel stares. Lachio himself stares. And somewhere behind Lord Ludo's eyes is a memory of a voice telling him long ago that none of this was his fault. Later that night, Sienna and her allies secretly watch the busy harbor as several cargo wagons arrive beside a large ship from the Eastern Empire. At first, everything looks like an ordinary trade operation, but Sienna quickly notices something suspicious. The merchants are exchanging a dangerous substance known as hermaphrodite, a plant-based drug that comes from the East. The drug creates a powerful feeling of happiness for a short time before leaving people completely addicted, which is why it has already been banned in its homeland. Somehow, someone has found a way to smuggle it into the Eternal City. Without wasting another second, Sienna signals the guards to surround the traders before they escape. The smugglers panic as soldiers rush toward them from every direction. Even after getting caught, one of the traders has the confidence to mock them, claiming they must have powerful connections if they dare interfere with this business. Sienna refuses to back down and declares that they stand for justice. The criminals are forced onto their knees, but instead of admitting the truth, they come up with the most ridiculous excuse imaginable. They insist they are secretly lovers meeting under the moonlight to exchange gifts and money. Honestly, that story is so unbelievable that nobody even pretends to accept it. Sienna immediately exposes their lie. She opens one of the containers, reveals the hidden drugs, and threatens to pour every last drop down one smuggler's throat if he refuses to speak. That terrifying warning completely breaks his confidence. He hurriedly admits they supply the drug to major black market leaders, who sell it at outrageous prices until their victims become hopelessly addicted. Once the buyers run out of money, the criminals seize their homes, land, and every valuable possession they own. It is an entire business built on ruining innocent lives. Even after confessing all of that, the man still refuses to reveal the person giving the orders, claiming they only work for money. Sienna is not convinced for even a second. She orders the guards to tie both smugglers up and take them away for questioning. Just then, another suspect suddenly tries to escape while secretly pulling a letter from inside his clothes. The paper falls to the ground before he gets away. Sienna quickly picks it up and instantly recognizes the handwriting. It belongs to Antonia. At that moment, she realizes this smuggling operation reaches far beyond a few greedy merchants, and someone far more dangerous is pulling the strings behind the scenes. Meanwhile, outside the city of Seitu, Prince Ladio prepares to launch a full-scale attack. Standing on high ground with Ludo, Hekel, and the rest of his warriors, he carefully studies the city's defenses before giving his orders. Instead of charging straight through the front gate, he divides his forces into separate groups. One unit will attack first and draw the defenders' attention, while Hekel leads another force around the side to strike the enemy from the flank. It is a risky plan, but everything unfolds exactly as Latio predicts. As the defenders rush to stop the first assault, Hekel's soldiers burst from the side and cut through their ranks before they even realize what is happening. Chaos spreads across the battlefield. Enemy soldiers fall one after another while the city gates are finally forced open. The moment the entrance clears, Ladio charges inside with the rest of his army. The guards freeze in fear as they recognize the warrior leading the attack. Some believe the legendary god of war himself has appeared on the battlefield. Others quickly correct them, revealing the terrifying truth. This is not the god of war. This is the Kingslayer, Prince Latio, who somehow survived certain death and has returned to finish the fight. Seeing him alive destroys the defenders' morale. Inside the city, Latio fights shoulder to shoulder with Hekel as they overwhelm every soldier standing in their way. Their teamwork tears through the enemy lines, leaving the defenders with almost no chance to recover. News of Latio's return soon reaches the king, who cannot believe the prince survives after falling from the cliff. His advisors immediately beg him to retreat before it is too late, warning that nobody has ever stopped Latio once he gains momentum in battle. They even call him an indestructible god of war, because every army that faces him ends up crushed beneath his advance. But the king lets his pride control his judgment. He refuses to abandon his throne and insists that the rightful ruler of Saga never runs from a fight. Unfortunately for him, Latio is already looking directly toward the palace. And judging by the fear spreading through the entire city, this battle is only moments away from reaching its final and most brutal stage. Lashio leaps over the heads of the royal guards, lands inside the throne room, and walks straight toward the king without slowing down. Every soldier parts before him as if nobody dares stand in his way. He raises his sword and points it directly at Camus' throat, finally ending the battle that has cost so many lives. Instead of begging for mercy, Camus begins speaking with surprising calm. He asks Lazio how victory feels now that he stands before the throne with absolute power. He reminds him that he killed his own father, making him the true Kingslayer. Then he defends everything he has done. According to him, the former king was too weak. He wanted peace while the kingdom slowly fell apart. Enemies grew stronger, innocent people became enslaved, and Saga kept losing ground because its ruler refused to fight back. Camus insists that only strength creates lasting peace. He then admits his greatest mistake was believing he could control Lazio by taking away his freedom. Looking at the young warrior now, he realizes the frightened boy from the hunting grounds no longer exists. Standing before him is a fearless king whose calm eyes hide overwhelming bloodlust. Camus even claims they are the same deep inside. But Lazio immediately rejects those words. He refuses to become another Camus. He declares they are nothing alike and orders the guards to imprison the former ruler instead of killing him. Honestly, that punishment might be even worse. As the guards drag Camus away, he completely loses his composure. He screams at Lashio to kill him instead, knowing a lifetime inside a prison filled with death row inmates is a fate he cannot bear. Meanwhile, in the Western Theodore Empire, another kingdom faces its own day of judgment. Inside the royal court, a young princess named Sienna stands before the king and presents the illegal drugs she seizes at the harbor. She explains that the substance creates temporary pleasure before trapping its victims in addiction. With continued use, it destroys both the body and mind until death becomes inevitable. The entire court erupts in disbelief. Then Sienna reveals something even worse. The operation leads directly back to Queen Antonia. The king turns toward her in complete fury while she kneels before the throne. Before she even has a chance to defend herself, Marie steps forward with another devastating report. She reveals that Antonia also hired assassins to murder both Prince Alice and Princess Sienna. Every suspect has already confessed. The royal advisors immediately condemn the queen, accusing her of betraying the royal family, conspiring with the Eastern Empire, and bringing disaster upon the entire nation. Cornered from every direction, Antonia lashes out at the advisors, calling them greedy traitors who happily accept her money before turning against her. The king finally delivers his judgment. Antonia is stripped of her title as queen and convicted of high treason. Her son Dio is banished from the capital forever. Mother and son desperately beg for mercy, but nobody listens anymore. Even then, Antonia refuses to admit defeat. She mocks the king, reminding him that he happily enjoys the wealth she provides and even uses the very drugs he now condemns. That comment pushes him beyond his limit. Furious, he orders the guards to cut out her tongue before carrying out her execution. Even while facing death, Antonia directs every ounce of hatred toward Sienna. She shouts that her greatest mistake is failing to kill her when she has the chance. Sienna quietly looks back and delivers one final response. Antonia does succeed in killing something. She kills the last bit of kindness Sienna still holds for her. Those words land harder than any sword. Moments later, the guards carry out the punishment, and Antonia's screams echo through the court while Dio watches in horror. The following day, crowds gather at the execution grounds as Antonia kneels beneath the executioner's blade. People throw insults and curses at the fallen queen while she waits for the inevitable. Sienna watches silently as the sentence is carried out. When the blade falls, one chapter of the kingdom finally comes to an end. Tears quietly fill Sienna's eyes as she looks toward the bright sky. The victory brings justice, but it does not erase the pain left behind. Meanwhile, back in the Saga Kingdom, the capital erupts into celebration. Horns sound across the city as thousands of people cheer Ladio's name. The prince marches through the streets as a victorious ruler. Yet he refuses to abandon the title of Kingslayer. Instead, he embraces it completely. The name that once brings shame now fills his enemies with fear. Every rival who hears it understands one simple truth. The path to the throne now belongs to Lazio, and anyone foolish enough to stand in his way is about to learn exactly why the entire kingdom fears his name. The balance of power across the continent changes almost overnight. The Eastern Empire rises at an unbelievable pace and soon becomes the strongest nation on the Theodore continent. Kingdom after kingdom begins watching its every move because nobody knows what its ambitious ruler plans to do next. And while the empire grows stronger each day, Sienna quietly prepares for a journey that will change her life forever. Inside the infirmary, a young princess named Sienna sits beside an unconscious man named Neotis. He still has not opened his eyes despite everything that has happened. She softly tells him how much the world has changed since he fell into his long sleep. So many battles have been fought, kingdoms have changed rulers, and countless lives have been turned upside down. She wishes he were awake to stand beside her through it all. Then she admits something close to her heart. She is about to leave for the Eastern Empire, and after all this time, she might finally meet someone she never forgets. You can already tell this journey means far more than politics. The day before her departure, 3 royal messengers arrive inside the throne room carrying an important invitation. They announce that King Nai invites the Western Empire to attend his grand coronation ceremony. But this is no ordinary celebration. The ceremony marks the moment he proclaims himself Emperor of the Holy Empire of the Theodore continent. That announcement immediately stuns the entire court. Sienna cannot believe his confidence. Declaring himself emperor is one thing, but expecting every kingdom to accept it is something else entirely. The messengers remain calm and politely explain that King Rhaeolus is in poor health and will struggle to make such a long journey. If the king cannot attend, then Crown Prince Alas is welcome to represent the kingdom instead. Lyle immediately grows suspicious and warns everyone that this invitation feels like a trap. Honestly, he has every reason to think that. The messengers continue revealing who else will attend the ceremony. Rulers from the northern kingdoms have already accepted the invitation. Then they casually mention another name that completely catches Sienna off guard. The new king of Saga will also be present. She freezes the moment she hears it. The messengers explain that the former political hostage has now become king after the deaths of his father and brother. Hearing those words sends countless questions racing through her mind. How does everything change so quickly? What exactly happens inside Saga while she is away? Before leaving, the messengers remind the court of the long friendship between both nations and express their hope that the Western Empire will attend. Once they leave, the room falls silent as everyone realizes refusing the invitation is almost impossible. The Eastern Empire has become too powerful to ignore, and openly rejecting its emperor would create a dangerous enemy. The advisors quickly begin preparing for the journey. Sienna announces that Lord Merlin will oversee the kingdom during her absence, and Merlin immediately promises not to disappoint her. Everyone knows this mission will take several months, perhaps even half a year. Because King Nai is famous for his unpredictable temper, General Nine is assigned to escort Prince Alas and protect him throughout the trip. Lyle confidently promises to bring the prince home safely, while Merlin jokingly reminds Nine to return in one piece as well. Nine acts offended by the concern before laughing it off, bringing one final lighthearted moment before the long voyage begins. Soon, the day of departure arrives. At the harbor, friends, soldiers, and officials gather to say their farewells as the royal group boards the waiting ships. Before they leave, one last warning is given to Sienna. When she finally meets the King of Saga, she must never reveal her true feelings or forget that she now travels as Crown Prince Alas. One careless mistake could expose everything. As the ships slowly sail away across the sea, Sienna gazes toward the endless horizon with a quiet smile. At last, she is about to see him again. At almost the same moment, far away on another ship, a young king named Latio looks up at the night sky and wonders if fate will finally bring them together. Without speaking a single word, both think of the same person. Sienna whispers Latio's name in her heart, while Latio quietly thinks of Sienna. After everything they have endured, destiny finally begins pulling them back toward each other. That moment honestly feels long overdue. Meanwhile, deep inside the Eastern Empire's magnificent capital, Emperor Naya impatiently waits inside his palace. He repeatedly asks why his guests have not arrived yet. A servant soon reports that every invited ruler has accepted the invitation and is already making the journey. Hearing that news fills the emperor with satisfaction. A slow smile spreads across his face as he lifts a crystal sphere in his hand and quietly declares that everything is finally falling into place. To everyone else, the coming coronation is a celebration. To Naya, it is the opening move of a much larger game, and every king traveling to his palace is nothing more than another piece he plans to move across the board. The Eastern Empire's greatest port welcomes visitors from every corner of the continent. The streets overflow with merchants selling fresh fruit, colorful fabrics, and all kinds of rare goods. Lyle cannot stop admiring the lively market, especially after spotting fruits he has never seen before. Sienna happily buys a melon while Lyle gets distracted by beautiful silk and immediately decides Merlin would look great wearing clothes made from it. She laughs and tells him to enjoy himself. Honestly, the two of them almost forget they are traveling on official business. Then, as always, Lyle's curiosity gets the better of him. A crowd gathers around a snake performer, and he rushes over without thinking twice. Sienna quickly tells him not to wander off, but he disappears into the crowd before she finishes speaking. At that exact moment, bright sunlight reflects from polished armor and blinds her for a second. When she opens her eyes again, Lyle is nowhere to be found. She searches the crowded streets while calling his name, but every road looks the same. Soon she realizes she is completely lost. Just then, a beautiful young woman named Diana approaches and kindly asks if she is looking for a handsome young man dressed in white. Sienna instantly believes she has found someone willing to help. Diana offers to lead the way, and without suspecting anything, Sienna follows her into a quiet alley. That is when the trap closes. Diana suddenly shoves her to the ground while several accomplices surround her. At first, they accuse Sienna of staring at her with improper intentions, but the truth quickly comes out. They are simply thieves looking for easy money. After searching her pockets and finding almost nothing, Diana angrily complains that someone dressed so well turns out to be completely broke. Sienna finally understands she is never the target of seduction. She is only another victim waiting to be robbed. The gang decides her clothes must be worth something and moves to strip them off by force. Panic immediately fills Sienna's mind. Hidden beneath those clothes is the secret of her identity, and if anyone discovers it, everything she works for will collapse. She desperately cries for help, but nobody comes. Just when things seem hopeless, a white-haired stranger suddenly appears out of nowhere. He knocks every attacker aside with ease before grabbing Sienna's hand and pulling her to safety. The moment she hears his voice, her heart almost stops. She knows that voice. Meanwhile, Diana watches the mysterious man disappear with their victim and quietly realizes something unusual. The person he rescues is not who everyone believes. She begins suspecting Sienna is actually a woman. That single discovery has the potential to destroy everything. The mysterious rescuer leads Sienna across the city until they reach a quiet bridge. He gently tells her she is safe now and reminds her never to wander away from her companions again. Then he points toward the bridge where her escorts are waiting. As he turns to leave, Sienna instinctively reaches for him. She stumbles forward, loses her balance, and falls directly into his arms. Time almost seems to stop. Looking into his face at such a close distance, she finally recognizes him. It is Latio. After everything they endure, after months of believing they might never meet again, fate finally brings them face to face. Sienna cannot stop staring. He is taller now. His face is more mature. Fresh scars cover his body, each one telling the story of another battle he survives. She silently wonders how much suffering he goes through to reach this point. At the same time, she hopes he keeps thinking about her just as she never stops thinking about him. But the reunion takes an unexpected turn. Believing Sienna is already dead, Latio quietly asks whether the princess ever learns the truth about everything that happens. His voice carries deep regret as he admits he is responsible for the tragedy that separates them. Sienna's heart sinks. She desperately wants to tell him she is standing right in front of him, but she remembers her promise. Sienna no longer exists. She now lives only as Crown Prince Alas. Latio then reveals he hears that Antonia has been executed and that Sienna's death has finally been avenged. He softly says she is finally able to rest in peace. Then, after nothing more than a quiet sigh, he turns around and walks away. That single reaction completely shatters Sienna's expectations. She secretly hopes he mourns her, cries for her, or at least struggles to hide his pain. Instead, he simply accepts the news and leaves. Ouch. That hurts far more than any sword ever could. Soon Lyle finally catches up after searching everywhere for her and announces that preparations for entering Constantine are complete. They will enter the Imperial Palace at first light, so everyone must return immediately. Even after hearing him, Sienna cannot stop replaying the encounter inside her mind. She keeps asking herself the same painful questions. Does her death truly mean so little to Lazio? Does he no longer care about her? Or perhaps he never does. Then another thought makes her even angrier. Why is he wandering around that district in the first place? Could he be visiting women while she spends all this time thinking about him? The more she thinks about it, the more frustrated she becomes. Poor Latio has absolutely no idea he is already losing an argument he does not even know exists. The following morning, excitement fills the streets of Constantine as people gather to catch a glimpse of the famous King of Saga. Crowds cheer the moment Latio rides through the city with his men. Young women openly admire his looks, while soldiers proudly escort him through the capital. Watching all of this from above, Sienna refuses to be impressed. She rolls her eyes, tells him not to get carried away by all the attention, and prepares to make her own move. Meanwhile, before that day, Heinkel notices Latio's red eyes and tells him to put on glasses. Back in the present, Sienna quietly rides through the city under her new identity. As she grips the reins, she silently says goodbye to the girl she once was. From this day onward, Sienna disappears from the world. Only Crown Prince Alas continues the journey toward the Imperial Palace, while two futures slowly move closer to a collision that neither side is ready for. 8 years old and already worlds apart in how they see things. A young girl named Sienna and a young boy named Latio are asked why people go to war, and the answers they give say everything about who they are. Latio says for survival. Sienna says for glory. Latio says to crush enemies. Sienna says to protect home. Neither of them is wrong exactly, but they are not saying the same thing at all. Sienna gets bored of the negotiations quickly and wanders off to pick flowers for her brother and her mother, delighted by the view and completely unbothered by the politics happening nearby. Then an arrow cuts through the air and stops just beside her. She spins around and sees a young boy holding a bow, looking at her with complete indifference, and she immediately screams "assassin" and backs away, threatening him with her brother's wrath. Latio unsheathes his small sword. Sienna screams for help. Then the sound of clashing steel, and a young Alas is there, telling his sister not to be afraid, putting himself between her and the boy from Saga. The two young boys meet blade to blade and hold each other at a stalemate until Latio's blade snaps. Alas looks at him and says simply that his blade is broken, and Latio turns and walks away without a word. Sienna immediately demands to know why her brother is letting him go after he tried to shoot her. Alas tells her quietly that if the blade had not snapped, the outcome would likely be very different right now, and then he tells her to look over there. Sienna looks and sees a dead snake beside her on the ground. She goes still. Alas tells her the boy from Saga probably was not trying to kill her. He was trying to save her. Back in the Saga camp, the guards are laughing among themselves, saying the war god's son came back from a hunt empty-handed. The king, a man named Boru, watches and tells Lazio gently that his son still has a long way to go before he is ready for the battlefield. Lazio looks up at his father and apologizes, and Boru asks him if he truly wishes to fight one day. Lazio says he does, that he wants to become a brave warrior like his father. Boru picks him up, holds him, and tells him something worth remembering. Do not do it to prove your strength or to cause destruction. Do it so that the vast and beautiful land beneath your feet can remain peaceful forever. Do it for something worth dying for. The negotiations between the two countries fall through not long after that. 3 years of war and bloodshed follow before the kings of West Theodore and Saga finally sit down and sign a peace treaty. And as part of that historic agreement, 2 young people are exchanged as political hostages. Lashio goes to the west, Alas goes to Saga. And the story that began with an arrow and a dead snake, and 2 children answering the same question differently, is only just getting started. The imperial capital welcomes rulers from every corner of the continent with a grand ceremony. Servants line the entrance and respectfully greet each visiting delegation as they arrive. Among the guests are Sienna and Prince Alas's entourage, along with King Lashio and his warriors. As they walk through the magnificent palace halls, Sienna cannot help noticing something different about Lashio. The anger that once burned in his eyes is gone. The swelling and redness have disappeared, leaving behind a much calmer expression. Of course, peace never lasts for long. Lyle and Heckle immediately start arguing as they shove each other while walking. Lyle tells the Sigarian barbarian to stay in his lane, and Heckle fires right back, saying he will walk wherever he pleases while calling Lyle a Theodorian dog. Honestly, these two could start a fight in an empty room. The guests soon enter the grand banquet hall, where dancers perform before the gathered rulers. Sienna watches in complete surprise because she has never seen this style of dance before. Everything about the performance feels extravagant and completely different from what she is used to. Heckle casually shrugs, acting as though none of it is impressive, while Lyle immediately tells him to stop showing off. Their bickering continues until Emperor Nai finally addresses everyone from his throne. He proudly welcomes every ruler and announces that the performance is specially prepared in their honor. But something about the throne immediately catches everyone's attention. Instead of an ordinary seat, it is built using kneeling people as part of its design. Even the Crown Princess of Quina cannot hide her discomfort and politely remarks that the throne is unusual. Another guest quietly mutters that it is simply in poor taste. The Emperor only smiles, clearly enjoying their reactions. Then the atmosphere suddenly changes. Servants walk through the hall carrying trays and stop in front of every ruler. Confused, Sienna watches as Emperor Nai calmly asks everyone to place their swords and weapons onto the trays before the ceremony continues. He claims the gathering is meant to strengthen friendships between nations, so there should be no reason to distrust one another. Every weapon will supposedly be returned once the celebration ends. The request immediately puts everyone on guard. Sienna realizes this is no simple security measure. It is a test. Whoever refuses risks insulting the most powerful empire on the continent. Then Emperor Nai turns directly toward Lashio and asks whether the King of Saga has any objections. Every eye in the room shifts toward him. Even Sienna's heart skips a beat. She knows better than anyone that a warrior's sword is their pride. No true sworder allows another person to touch it without permission. She silently prays. Latio does nothing reckless. For a long moment, the room falls completely silent. Then Latio slowly draws his sword. Every ruler immediately tenses, expecting the worst. Even the servants stop breathing. But instead of attacking, Latio calmly returns the blade to its sheath before placing it onto the tray with his own hands. The tension instantly melts away. He explains that the Eastern Empire is now far stronger than the Western Empire ever was during its golden age. Picking a fight under these circumstances would accomplish nothing except disaster. Emperor Nai smiles with satisfaction and praises Lashio for his wisdom and honesty. Watching all of this leaves Sienna deep in thought. The impulsive young warrior she once knew seems to be disappearing. Standing before her now is a king who carefully weighs every decision before acting. She cannot help wondering if Lashio has truly changed after everything he endures. As the banquet continues, the music grows louder, and the guests lose themselves in conversation. Slipping away from the crowd, Sienna quietly sits beside a peaceful pool to clear her thoughts. She stares into the water while replaying everything that has happened since arriving in the Eastern Empire. Meeting Lazio again, watching how much he has changed, and hiding her own identity have left her emotions completely tangled. Lost in thought, she never notices another pair of eyes quietly watching her from behind. Standing in the shadows with a faint smile on his face, Emperor Naya silently observes her every move. And judging by that smile, he already has something far more dangerous in mind. A servant presents him with a bottle, and he pours a drink while praising the prince's elegance and dignity. Then he brings up someone Sienna never expects to hear about. He talks about her late sister and recalls a beautiful encounter from years ago. The problem is obvious. He cannot even remember Sienna's name properly. Ouch! That one definitely stings. Still, she keeps her composure and politely refuses the drink he offers. After everything she learns about Nai, there is no chance she is accepting a mysterious cup from him. As she prepares to leave, disaster strikes from an unexpected direction. A snake suddenly bites her neck. Nai immediately acts concerned and offers to escort her for treatment, but something feels wrong. The bite leaves her dizzy almost instantly. Her legs grow weak. Her vision starts blurring. Meanwhile, Nai watches with a smile that tells a completely different story. Sienna quickly realizes the poison is no accident. She struggles toward the exit, desperately trying to get away before the effects become stronger. Every step feels heavier than the last. Her voice barely works. Her thoughts become foggy. And worst of all, the people who should be protecting her are nowhere nearby. At the banquet, the bodyguards remain distracted while enjoying the festivities. Nai takes advantage of the situation and catches Sienna before she collapses. He gently supports her while pretending to help, then carries her away to a private room. Sienna knows exactly how dangerous the situation is becoming, but her body refuses to cooperate. Meanwhile, across the palace, another king notices something strange. Gladio spots Nai leading Alas away and immediately senses that something is wrong. Trusting his instincts, he follows them. Inside the room, Nai begins speaking in a way that makes his intentions painfully clear. Sienna's panic grows stronger with every second. Then, the door suddenly swings open. Standing in the doorway is Latio. The timing could not be better. He coldly warns Emperor Nai to control himself and reminds him that Alas is not someone he can simply take for himself. The Emperor is furious, but Latio does not care. He immediately carries Sienna away and brings her somewhere safe. Once there, he gently lays her on a bed and prepares to fetch her bodyguard. But the poison is still coursing through her system. Her body burns with unbearable heat and her thoughts are completely scrambled. As Latio turns to leave, she grabs his hand. Then she pulls him closer and desperately begs him not to go. Latio stares at her in confusion while she struggles to stay conscious. And just like that, the reunion both of them wait so long for suddenly becomes far more complicated than either of them expects. At first, he tries to stay calm and urges her to come to her senses, but the situation is getting worse by the second. Sweat runs down her face as she struggles to speak. Nai clearly does something to her, and Latio immediately starts trying to figure out what. Did she eat something? Did she drink something? Whatever it is, the effects are hitting hard. As she continues speaking, her voice grows weaker. She admits that her body feels strange and that something is seriously wrong. Looking at her now, Latio cannot help feeling as though he is staring at Sienna herself. The resemblance is almost unbearable. Her hand rests against his face, cool against his skin, while his heartbeat grows louder and louder. For a brief moment, reason starts slipping away. He moves closer. The distance between them disappears. And this is where things become dangerous. Man, this situation is a disaster waiting to happen. At the very last second, Latio forces himself to act. Instead of giving in to the moment, he knocks her unconscious and gently lays her back on the bed. After arranging her clothes and making sure she is safe, he quickly leaves the room. Outside, frustration immediately crashes down on him. He cannot believe how close he comes to losing control. In his mind, Sienna is already dead. The person inside that room is supposed to be her twin brother, not her. Yet every instinct in his body keeps telling him otherwise. The more he thinks about it, the more unsettled he becomes. By the time he reaches the palace pool, he is questioning his own judgment. Maybe he is the one who needs to get a grip. Unfortunately for him, the night is far from over. While standing beside the water, lost in thought, a hand suddenly bursts out from beneath the surface and grabs him. Before he can react, he is yanked straight into the pool. Water crashes around him as he struggles back to the surface, coughing violently and trying to understand what just happened. Then he finally sees the person responsible. Sitting there with a smile on his face is Emperor Nai himself, accompanied by his snake. The Emperor looks completely amused by the whole thing. Gladio stares back in confusion, now face to face with one of the most dangerous men on the continent. And judging by that smile, Nai has no intention of making this conversation pleasant. Something feels deeply wrong inside the Eastern Empire's palace. Night after night, endless banquets keep the visiting rulers distracted with wine, luxury, and entertainment. Sitting among the guests, Sienna, disguised as Prince Alaz, watches the situation grow worse. The original purpose of the trip is slowly being forgotten. While everyone indulges themselves, Emperor Nai continues delaying the coronation ceremony. Even Lazio finally grows suspicious and directly asks when the ceremony will actually take place. Nai brushes the question aside with a smile and suggests that perhaps his guests are unhappy with the hospitality. The other rulers quickly deny having any complaints, but the emperor's attention soon shifts toward Alas. He hints that a prince from such a powerful empire might be expecting something more extravagant. And this is where things take a disturbing turn. With a snap of his fingers, a platform rises from the center of the hall. At first, everyone watches with curiosity. Then a large cage emerges. Inside are women dressed in decorative feathers, chained together, and treated like exotic pets rather than human beings. Nai proudly presents them as though they are part of the evening's entertainment. The atmosphere immediately changes. Some rulers laugh and cheer, others eagerly join in. One woman cries out as a chain around her neck yanks her forward. Another ruler strikes servants for his own amusement while terrified captives scramble across the floor. The whole spectacle is twisted. Even Lazio looks disgusted. He can barely hide his anger as he watches people being treated like property. Meanwhile, Alas notices a familiar face among the captives. One of the women struggling inside the cage is Diana, the scammer who once lured her into an alley and nearly robbed her. At first, she worries Diana might recognize her true identity, but that concern quickly fades when she sees what is happening. Diana refuses to submit like the others. She fights back. She argues. She struggles. Unfortunately, that only draws more attention. One ruler grabs her by the hair and decides to make an example out of her. When she spits in his face, his expression darkens instantly. He seizes her head and forces it into a large jar of wine. She thrashes and coughs as he repeatedly dunks her beneath the surface while the crowd watches. Sitting there, Alas feels her anger rising with every second. She keeps waiting for someone to intervene. Surely somebody will stop this. Surely somebody will help. But nobody moves. Not the rulers. Not the servants. Not even the emperor. Nai simply watches the entire scene with amusement. The longer it continues, the harder it becomes to sit still. Finally, she reaches her limit. Before anyone can react, Alas rises from her seat and marches straight toward the struggling woman. The room falls silent as she grabs Diana and pulls her away from her tormentor. Then she turns toward the ruler and calmly delivers a challenge disguised as a smile. If he enjoys her so much, that is unfortunate. Because from this moment onward, the woman belongs to her. And just like that, every eye in the hall swings toward Alas as the tension inside the palace explodes. The banquet ends in complete chaos, but instead of letting things escalate further, a young princess disguised as Prince Alas takes the captive woman and rides far away from the palace. Deep in the forest, the two finally stop. Back at the banquet, several rulers are still furious that Alas dares interfere with their entertainment and demand that others take their side. Latio remains silent through the entire argument. Meanwhile, far from the palace walls, Alas hands the woman a pouch of money and tells her to start over somewhere safe. She warns her never to return to that life and never let herself be dragged back into the emperor's palace. The woman finally introduces herself as Diana. Then she reveals something unexpected. She already knows Alas is not who she claims to be. For a moment, the air turns tense. Alas calmly points out that she now knows a dangerous secret. Diana simply accepts it. If exposing the truth means dying, then so be it. What surprises Alas even more is Diana's reason for staying quiet. She admits that from the very beginning, there is something different about her rescuer. Even when everything goes wrong, Alas never stops fighting. She never abandons people who need help. Diana cannot ignore someone like that. Despite living in a world filled with lies and betrayal, she chooses to trust her. Before leaving, Diana promises the secret dies with her. Then, with a playful smile, she teases Alas about a certain white-haired king. Honestly, this girl notices things a little too quickly. Later that night, Diana sneaks Alas away from the palace and into a quiet room hidden from prying eyes. There, she finally says something nobody has said to her in a very long time. She tells her to stop being Prince Alas for one night. For years, Sienna buries her real self beneath duty, sacrifice, and responsibility. She convinces herself there is no room left for the girl she used to be. Everything she does is for the people she loves and the kingdom she protects. Diana listens to all of it before gently pushing back. None of the powerful men at the banquet step forward to help her earlier. Diana does. And because of that, she wants Sienna to have one evening where she is free to be herself. So, for the first time in what feels like forever, Sienna lets her guard down. A wig replaces the disguise that has become part of her identity. Looking into the mirror feels strange. The girl staring back almost looks like someone from another life. As she walks alone beside a quiet riverbank, memories flood her mind. Things that once felt ordinary now seem distant, like scenes from a dream that fades the moment morning arrives. She wonders how long it has been since she simply lives as Sienna. The peaceful moment lasts only a few seconds. Suddenly, she looks up and freezes. Standing nearby is Latio. After everything that happens, after all the disguises, secrets, and years apart, the last person she expects to see is the one person she can never stop thinking about. While the celebrations continue inside the palace, Lyle paces near the gates. Hours have passed, and Prince Alas is still missing. The closer it gets to nightfall, the more uneasy everyone becomes. If anything happens to the crown prince, there will be no explaining it. As the others argue about what to do, Latio quietly makes up his mind. He remembers what happened earlier at the banquet. When everyone else hesitates, Alas steps forward without fear. The more he thinks about it, the more the prince reminds him of someone he once knew. So instead of waiting around, he mounts his horse and rides out into the night. When questioned, he simply says he already has a good idea where the missing prince will be. Following a path away from the palace, Latio eventually reaches a quiet riverside. And there she is. Standing beneath the night sky is the person he has been searching for. For a moment, he simply watches from a distance. The scene feels almost unreal. Then Sienna notices someone approaching and turns around. Their eyes meet. The instant Latio sees her dressed like that, all the doubts he has been carrying suddenly disappear. Without thinking, he rushes forward and pulls her into a tight embrace. Relief floods his voice as he tells her she is still alive. Unfortunately for him, those words only make Sienna's emotions even more complicated. Deep down, she wants to believe him. She wants to believe her existence still matters to him. But the memories of their earlier encounter are still fresh in her mind. As far as the world is concerned, Sienna is dead. She keeps repeating that fact to herself while trying to regain control. Then Latio blurts out the one conclusion his brain can come up with. He asks if Prince Alas is secretly a crossdresser. Honestly, after everything he has seen, the poor guy is desperately trying to make sense of the impossible. Realizing she is moments away from being exposed, Sienna acts fast. She pushes him away and immediately scolds him for hugging a stranger. Then she introduces herself as Nessie and insists he has mistaken her for someone else. To make the lie more convincing, she begins speaking in the Sheila language with perfect fluency. That completely throws Latio off balance. There is one small problem with his theory. The Sienna he remembers absolutely hates studying the Sheila language. Years ago, she struggled endlessly with it while Merlin practically forced her to learn. Seeing this woman speak it so naturally creates just enough doubt to shake his confidence. Slowly, the certainty begins slipping away. At last, Lazio lowers his hand. The hope that surged through him moments ago starts fading. Maybe he really does make a mistake. Maybe this woman only resembles Sienna. After all, Sienna is supposed to be dead. The thought hurts more than he wants to admit. Embarrassed by his outburst, he apologizes for the misunderstanding and steps back. Watching him retreat leaves Sienna stunned. She should feel relieved. Her disguise survives. Her secret remains safe. Yet seeing the disappointment in his eyes feels far worse than being discovered. As Latio turns away, both of them are left carrying the same painful question. What if the person standing right in front of them is the one they have been searching for all along? A man who has already lost everything stands there drowning in regret. Latio admits that no matter how many times he searches for the woman he loves in a sea of faces, she is gone. To him, her death is the ultimate punishment for his sins. Sienna listens quietly before asking a question that cuts straight through his sorrow. Since she is already dead, what is the point of your apology? The words leave him speechless. He finally accepts that he has lost the person he loves most. Seeing his pain, Sienna's eyes fill with tears. She quickly wipes them away, leans forward, and kisses him on the forehead. Latio immediately recoils in shock, but Sienna brushes it off, claiming she only mistook him for someone she likes. She even insists she is pursuing someone else. Completely confused, Latio watches her walk away and can only wonder what kind of peculiar girl she truly is. Later, while searching for her, Latio finds Sienna with Diana. After confirming she is safe, he asks her to return to the palace. Before leaving, Sienna encourages Diana to abandon her current life and start a respectable business. Diana agrees, but not before teasing her one last time. She points out that someone living under a fake identity has no right to lecture others about honesty. Sienna says her farewells and rides away, leaving those words hanging in the air. The following morning, the capital erupts with excitement as crowds gather to celebrate King Niall. His statue is paraded through the streets while citizens chant his name with overwhelming enthusiasm. Even Sienna finds his popularity surprising. Sitting beside her, Latio explains that the Eastern Empire thrives because of its vast natural resources and powerful trade network. Wealth constantly flows into the nation, making Niall beloved by his people despite his flaws. Sienna understands the reasoning, but it does little to improve her opinion of the emperor. She knows his prosperity is built on far more than honest leadership. Before long, the coronation ceremony begins. A priest attempts to perform the ritual, but Niall barely lets him speak, before placing the crown on his own head and declaring himself emperor of the Holy Theodore Empire. The crowd erupts into cheers while Sienna watches with growing irritation. Then the ceremony takes a shocking turn when servants carry in an enormous, ornate box. Niall claims it is a gift from the gathered rulers, but their stunned expressions reveal they know nothing about it. As the box opens, a magnificent sword emerges, silencing the entire hall, the Holy Sword Immortal. Sienna immediately recognizes the legendary weapon and knows it should not even exist anymore. Just when confusion reaches its peak, Niall reveals the truth. The sword is not the original immortal. Instead, it is a new blade forged from the personal weapons of every king gathered at the ceremony, making it the real holiest sword of kings. The moment Sienna spots Nathiel's ruby embedded within the weapon, her eyes widen in disbelief. Across the hall, Latio rises from his seat in anger, while the other rulers erupt in outrage. Before anyone can act, guards surround them with lowered spears. Holding the sword high above his head, Niall proudly declares himself the Holy King and demands that every ruler bow before him and pledge their allegiance. The hall instantly becomes a battlefield without swords being drawn, and neither Sienna nor Latio shows the slightest intention of kneeling. The Grand Hall of the Eastern Empire falls into an uneasy silence as the gathered rulers stand before the self-proclaimed emperor. One king finally loses his patience and demands that the guards escort them out immediately. Instead of showing concern, Niall casually leans back on his throne and smiles. There is no need to shout. According to him, the guards they are hoping for are already locked away in the dungeon. The revelation sends murmurs throughout the hall. Before anyone can react further, servants place a scroll on the table before the assembled rulers. Sienna narrows her eyes as she reads its contents and immediately understands what this is. Niall is not asking for cooperation. He is demanding submission. With absolute confidence, the emperor explains the terms. Every kingdom present will become a vassal state of the Holy Theodore Empire. In exchange for his so-called protection, each nation must swear loyalty to him and pay an annual tribute of 350 pounds in gold. The demand instantly sparks outrage. One ruler rises from his seat and argues that recent wars and famines have left his people struggling to survive. Gathering such an enormous amount of wealth every year would be impossible. Niall dismisses the concern without a second thought. The suffering of their citizens means nothing to him. Whether they can afford it or not is their problem, not his. The atmosphere grows even more hostile when another ruler asks what happens if they refuse. Niall's smile widens. If they disagree, he will simply destroy their homelands. Shock spreads across the room. Several rulers immediately accuse him of arrogance, declaring that their kingdoms are not livestock waiting to be slaughtered. Even if they are smaller than the Eastern Empire, they refuse to sign such a humiliating treaty. The challenge only amuses Niall. Casually setting down his drink, he reminds one ruler that a fleet of Eastern Empire warships is already stationed near his southern waters. The ships are armed with seafire, a devastating weapon feared across the continent. With a single order, his navy could reduce entire fleets and coastal cities to ash. The threat lands exactly as intended. The ruler's confidence immediately crumbles. Faced with the possibility of annihilation, he reluctantly reaches for a pen and agrees to sign. Niall praises the decision and advises the remaining rulers to follow the same path if they value their nations. For a brief moment, it seems fear might win. Then Sienna rises from her seat. Her voice cuts through the hall like a blade. She reminds everyone that Niall has already crowned himself emperor, placed himself above every ruler on the continent, and even melted the sacred weapons of kings into a symbol of his own authority. Now he expects them to kneel before him as well. She refuses. No matter how powerful he becomes, the Western Empire will never bow to his arrogance. Her declaration reignites the courage of the other rulers. One after another, they begin voicing their opposition. Even if they submit today, there is no guarantee Niall will not seize their lands tomorrow. Across the table, Latio suddenly stands and shoves the treaty from the table. On behalf of the Saga Kingdom, he refuses as well. The rejection finally shatters Niall's patience. His expression darkens as he calls them ungrateful fools. At once, guards flood into the chamber from every direction and level their spears at the rulers. The hall erupts into chaos. Latio moves first, cutting through advancing soldiers with frightening precision. Other rulers join the fight while Sienna battles her way through the crowd. For a moment, it looks as though they might break through. Then Niall reveals that he has prepared for this outcome. A heavy net suddenly drops from above, trapping both Sienna and Latio before they can escape. No matter how hard they struggle, they cannot free themselves. Watching from his throne, Niall calmly announces that since they refuse to share a drink with him, they will instead spend some time in the finest water prison the Eastern Empire has to offer. Bound and helpless, the two are dragged away while the Emperor watches with satisfaction, already looking forward to breaking their spirits inside the deadly prison waiting beneath his palace. Cold water fills the dungeon prison as two captives struggle to stay afloat. Outside the cage, a self-satisfied emperor lounges comfortably in his chair and mocks them. According to him, the Crown Princess of Tai and the King of Ireland have already made concessions and returned to the comfort of the palace. The only people still refusing to submit are Sienna and Latio. Even trapped and exhausted, Sienna refuses to back down. She coughs before declaring that the Western Empire will never bow to him. The response only earns an amused smile. Rather than denying his role in the Empire's downfall, the Emperor casually points out how close it already is to collapse. Sienna immediately fires back, accusing him of being the one who pushed it toward destruction in the first place. The Emperor quickly grows bored of the argument. Seeing the two former enemies agreeing with each other, he remarks that they seem to have buried the hatchet. Since they are both so stubborn, he decides to help them calm down. With a simple clap of his hands, servants dump dozens of snakes into the water. The sight alone is enough to send Sienna into panic. The Emperor assures them the snakes are not venomous, but there is a cruel grin on his face as he adds one important detail. Their bites still hurt. Almost immediately, the reptiles begin swarming around the prisoners. Sienna screams as several latch onto her, desperately trying to shake them off while the Emperor watches the spectacle with amusement. As the chaos unfolds, another problem becomes painfully obvious. The closer they move toward the center of the prison, the deeper the water becomes. If the snakes do not get them first, exhaustion and drowning eventually will. Latio quickly realizes they only have one safe location left. In the middle of the prison stands a small stone pedestal rising above the water. Without wasting another second, both prisoners swim toward it while fighting through the swarm of snakes around them. Latio reaches the pedestal first and manages to pull himself onto it. For a brief moment, it seems they have found a way out. Then he notices the chain attached to his wrist. He immediately reaches out to help Sienna and tells her to grab his hand, but no matter how hard she tries, she cannot reach him. Coughing and struggling to stay afloat, she slowly begins to sink back into the water while confusion spreads across Latio's face. That confusion is exactly what the Emperor is waiting for. Laughing from outside the prison, he finally reveals the truth. Both prisoners are bound by the same chain, with part of it hidden inside the wall. The chain is only long enough for one person to stand safely on the pedestal at a time. If one survives above the water, the other must remain below. With that cruel revelation hanging over them, the Emperor prepares to leave. He casually informs them that he will return the following day and looks forward to seeing which one is dead, Sienna or Latio. Then he walks away, leaving the two prisoners trapped inside a nightmare designed to force them into an impossible choice. Bruised, bleeding, and barely able to stand, Lazio remains trapped inside the water prison while Sienna drifts nearby, looking frighteningly close to death. At that moment, a vision flashes through his mind. The King of Saga lies dead, slain by his own hands, while King Nile stands before him victorious. According to the Emperor, war between the Western Empire and the Saga Kingdom has become inevitable. There is only one path left: kneel and become his ally. In the vision, Lazio drops to one knee. Nile lifts his chin and declares that he will serve as the Emperor's sword and shield in a new age of prosperity. The image feels less like a dream and more like a warning of the future waiting for him if he gives in. Elsewhere, the Emperor lounges comfortably on his bed, laughing to himself. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the same outcome. Soon, he believes, that beautiful dream will become reality. Gently stroking his pet snake, he celebrates the thought of finally breaking the one person who continues to defy him. More than victory itself, he looks forward to seeing despair twist across his enemy's face. The idea alone fills him with delight, and both man and snake seem to share the same cruel amusement. Back inside the prison, reality grows even worse. Sienna slips beneath the water as snakes swarm around her. The moment Latio notices, he dives from the pedestal without hesitation. Fighting through the water, he reaches her and uses the last of his strength to push her towards safety. Sienna surfaces in shock and immediately realizes he is missing. Refusing to abandon him, she dives back into the water and searches through the darkness until she finally finds him struggling among the snakes. As they cling to each other and fight to stay afloat, Sienna finally understands the true purpose of the prison. Nile wants them to sacrifice one another. He wants the survivor to live with the guilt and eventually swear loyalty to him. Latio immediately rejects the idea. He would rather die than kneel before that man. Sienna refuses to accept either outcome. If they cannot both stand on the pedestal, then they simply will not use it the way Nile intended. Studying the chain connecting them, she quickly realizes something important. While it is too short for both of them to climb onto the platform at the same time, it is still long enough for them to reach one another. Using the chain, the pedestal, and the natural buoyancy of the water, they might be able to support themselves without forcing either person to drown. It is a desperate plan, but right now it is the only plan they have. The two struggle into position and cling to the edge of the pedestal together. Sienna coughs violently as exhaustion threatens to overwhelm her, yet she still manages a weak smile. At least they have found a way to avoid drowning. Then, to her surprise, Latio suddenly wraps an arm around her back to keep her from slipping beneath the water. The unexpected contact leaves her completely stunned. Of all the things she expects to happen inside a death trap filled with snakes, this is not one of them. She stares back at him in disbelief and asks what he thinks he is doing at a time like this, while the two remain locked together in a desperate struggle to survive the night. The freezing water continues to rise around them as Latio holds Sienna from behind, using his own body as a shield against the relentless snakes. Embarrassed by the position, Sienna instinctively tries to push him away, but he immediately stops her. The more she struggles, the more attention they attract from the snakes. Right now, conserving energy is their only chance of surviving until help arrives. As much as the situation pains him, they have no choice but to remain like this. Hearing his explanation, Sienna realizes she completely misunderstands his intentions. By keeping their bodies close, he reduces the snakes' attacks and helps them stay warm in the freezing water. She feels foolish for assuming anything else. Unlike certain shameless people she knows, Latio is genuinely trying to protect her. Even so, Sienna cannot ignore the grim reality of their situation. Rescue seems impossible. No matter how capable their allies are, nobody can reach them in time. Yet before she sinks too deeply into despair, Latio quietly speaks into her ear. For a moment, his words make her heart skip a beat. He tells her that she reminds him of Sienna. Panic flashes through her mind. Has he finally figured it out? But his reasoning has nothing to do with appearance or identity. Instead, he explains that both women share the same unwavering courage. No matter how powerful their enemies become, they always stand their ground. Relieved, she quickly hides her reaction and jokes that it is only natural for twins to resemble one another. The conversation takes a heavier turn when Lazio begins reflecting on the past. Sometimes he wonders if everything would have been different had they never exchanged places. Maybe Bayhem would never have fallen. Maybe Sienna would still be alive. Maybe all the suffering that followed could have been avoided. Deep down, he blames himself for the tragedies that shattered her peaceful life. Sienna listens in silence before asking the question he has been avoiding. Does he regret meeting her? The answer comes without hesitation. No. Even if he were given the chance to choose again, he would still want to be the person standing beside her every day. The one who holds her hand. The one who embraces her. Those words leave Sienna completely stunned. For a moment, her imagination runs wild. She pictures another version of herself immediately throwing him into the snake-filled water for saying something so shameless. The mental image is so absurd that it almost distracts her from the seriousness of the situation. Honestly, this man has terrible timing. Yet despite her embarrassment, she cannot deny the sincerity behind his words. Lachio continues speaking, his voice growing weaker with every sentence. Even if they had never exchanged places, the conflict between their nations would still have dragged all of them into tragedy. Ordinary citizens, nobles, and even Sienna herself would never have escaped the coming war. Instead of dwelling on the past, he believes this crisis might become an opportunity to unite their nations against the Eastern Empire and stand together against Nia. But as he speaks, his head suddenly lowers onto her shoulder. Sienna immediately senses something is wrong. Turning around, she discovers the reason. A snake has wrapped itself around Lachio from behind, sinking its fangs into him while he silently endures the pain to protect her. The Eastern Empire's prison is unusually quiet until the sound of rattling chains suddenly echoes through the corridor. Inside one of the cells, a legendary warrior lounges lazily on a pile of straw while another prisoner paces around in frustration. The restless prisoner finally snaps and asks why the strongest warrior of the Saga Kingdom is doing absolutely nothing. Instead of answering immediately, the giant warrior slowly rises to his feet. The moment he stands, the atmosphere changes. Guards rush over in panic, warning each other that these prisoners are important political figures and must not be harmed. Unfortunately for them, they realize that concern comes a little too late. The warrior moves first. A single strike sends one guard crashing into the wall. His companion joins the fight, and within moments, the prison corridor becomes a disaster zone. Guards drop one after another until the survivors desperately try to seal the cell gates. The giant casually wedges his leg between the closing bars and forces them back open. Moments later, both prisoners stroll out of their cells while the guards lie unconscious behind them. His companion cannot help but laugh at how absurdly easy it looks. The warrior simply shrugs and remarks that he is not even trying yet. Meanwhile, deep inside the water prison, the situation grows far more desperate. Sienna struggles to keep an unconscious Lachio above the surface while snakes continue circling them. She repeatedly calls his name, but he refuses to wake up. Panic slowly begins creeping into her mind. His wound continues bleeding, and every passing minute weakens him further. Thankfully, she remembers the emergency treatment techniques Master Merlin once taught her. Carefully supporting his body, she inspects the injury and discovers several old scars covering his stomach. The sight reminds her of everything he has already endured to protect others. Unfortunately, admiration does nothing to solve the immediate problem. Her own strength is running out. If she loses balance for even a second, both of them will sink beneath the water. Desperately searching for a solution, she considers every option available. A kiss immediately gets rejected. A headbutt sounds even worse. Finally, her eyes settle on his shoulder. Maybe pain will wake him up. She prepares herself, apologizes in advance, and bites down. Nothing, not even a twitch. Frustrated and exhausted, she decides there is only one place left to try. Staring at his neck, she takes a deep breath and mutters that he had better not blame her for this later. Before she can follow through, salvation finally arrives. The prison doors burst open as the escaped prisoners charge into the chamber. The sight waiting for them leaves both men completely frozen. Sienna is holding Lachio in her arms while the two are pressed tightly together in the middle of a water prison. For several seconds, neither rescuer knows what to say. One wonders whether they arrived too early. The other wonders whether they arrived too late. Eventually, common sense wins, and they rush forward to unlock the chains binding the prisoners. Once freed, they immediately check Lachio's condition. The warrior nearly panics when he sees the blood covering his friend, only to learn that the wound has already stopped bleeding. Relieved, the group quickly turns their attention to escape. Unfortunately, getting out of the prison is only the beginning. The palace itself is surrounded by enormous walls, heavily guarded gates, and countless soldiers. Even with their combined strength, escaping the Eastern Empire will not be easy. Rather than giving up, the group gathers together and quickly formulates a plan. Outside, chaos erupts throughout the prison complex. Guards suddenly discover that their valuable prisoners have escaped and sound the alarm. Fighting immediately breaks out across the courtyard as warriors crash into soldiers from every direction. Flames soon spread through the prison grounds, turning the entire area into a blazing distraction. The commotion eventually reaches the Emperor himself. Furious, he leaps out of bed demanding answers. A terrified servant informs him that the prisoners from the Saga Kingdom and Western Empire have escaped. The Emperor explodes with rage and orders every available soldier to pursue them. However, before he can issue another command, he feels cold steel pressing against his throat. Standing directly behind him is Sienna. Unlike the Emperor, she has no interest in elaborate schemes or psychological games. Her demands are simple. If he wants to keep breathing, he will order the gates opened and allow everyone to leave. For the first time in a long while, the Emperor finds himself completely powerless. Soon, the Emperor is escorted through the city like an unwilling hostage, while countless guards watch helplessly from every direction. No one dares interfere with a sword resting against their ruler's neck. Under Sienna's command, he orders the city gates opened. Massive doors slowly swing apart, revealing freedom on the other side. The escapees begin moving through the opening while soldiers reluctantly stand down. It seems their plan has worked perfectly. Then disaster strikes at the very last moment. The Emperor's beloved pet snake suddenly launches itself towards Sienna from a blind spot. Even the Emperor shouts a warning. The attack happens in an instant, but Latio reacts even faster. His blade flashes through the air, severing the snake before it can do any serious harm. The creature falls lifeless to the ground. Silence follows. The Emperor stares at the body of his beloved companion in complete disbelief. While everyone else rides toward freedom, he drops to his knees beside the dead snake. Tears stream down his face as he cradles it in his arms. Grief quickly transforms into hatred. Through clenched teeth, he swears that both nations will pay for what happened today. As the escapees disappear beyond the gates of the Eastern Empire, the Emperor remains behind, mourning the only thing in the world he truly loves and vowing revenge that will shake entire kingdoms. If you've enjoyed this so far, please comment Theodore below for part 3. Until next time, ciao.